across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome to the home of common sense. So much to get through this afternoon, as Julia has been discussing Donald Trump criticising Keir Starmer, expressing surprise and displeasure in equal measure at Britain's response, or lack of, to the Iran war. The US president insisted the UK should be involved enthusiastically in helping the American forces reopen the Strait of Hormuz. More on that story in just a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, the chief executive of the country's top renewable energy body has urged Ed Miliband to approve increased North Sea drilling to secure energy supply, citing the Middle East crisis and volatile prices. When the chief of the Renewable UK department is telling you to drill, baby, drill, there's clearly a bit of a problem out there. Details to come. And as you've been hearing, Kent is implementing emergency measures, including antibiotics and vaccinations, for thousands of students to contain a deadly meningitis outbreak just before the Easter break and prevent a national spread. The Health Secretary has been speaking on this in the last hour. More to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news, right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Should the UK be offering more assistance to the United States? The US president still annoyed by what he sees as his greatest ally doing absolutely diddly. Nada, rien, nothing at all. Let's have a listen. Trump in the Oval Office on this very point just yesterday.
When I hear the UK, which was sort of considered the Rolls-Royce of allies, right? When you say they were the oldest and they were going to be there, and I say it would be really helpful if you'd send over a couple of ships, and if you have some minesweepers, which they do, be very helpful. And the Prime Minister is a nice man. I think he's a very nice guy. He says, well, I'd like to ask my team. I said, you don't have to worry about a team. You don't have a team. You're the Prime Minister. You can make a decision. Well, I have to speak to my people. I said, you don't have to speak to anybody. So it was very disappointing. And then after we obliterated them and destroyed their military, the whole thing, and it became a much safer zone, he said, we're going to send over 2 aircraft carriers. I said, I don't want them anymore. I don't want them after we win. I want them before we start. I don't need your aircraft carriers after we've already won.
Yeah, shove your aircraft carriers. This does, by the way, seem to have caused a little bit of confusion at Westminster, because the UK government don't actually have and never did have 2 aircraft carriers available. One is not fit for purpose and the other is earmarked for the Arctic. So there's some confusion on the authenticity of that story. There really wasn't any possibility of sending 2 aircraft carriers. Let's not forget, though, Keir Starmer's original position on this war.
The UK was not involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel.
God, he's good, isn't he? He's like a flipping ghost. The US president says that we all have a responsibility to help. Let's have a listen to him speaking on Air Force One.
We're always there for NATO. We're helping them win Ukraine. As many, it's got a notion in between us. Does it affect us when we've helped them? It'd be interesting to see what country wouldn't help us with a very small endeavor, which is just keeping the strait open.
Well, that's what he says. NATO countries, you know, get moving, for goodness sake. You should be helping. We'll help you. You help us. And, of course, we know Keir Starmer has a very different position.
The UK was not involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel.
He's so good. Like Churchillian stuff he's wheeling out there. Look, this is America's war, OK, along with Israel. Let's be fair to every other country out there in the world. The Americans gave no notice to any country and didn't engage in any kind of tactical military planning with any of its allies. This just happened. So as much as we might want to stand with America, this is of their own making. However, and this is where we are, We can't turn back the clock. We are at some level involved, whether we like it or not. Interesting leader in today's Times makes a really good point on this. They say this. The issue must be resolved by mature discussions between allies, not megaphone social media diplomacy that helps no one. That's a bit of a swipe at Trump, I assume. They say this in the leader in the Times. The dreadful weakness of the Royal Navy notwithstanding, Britain has assets and expertise that can make a difference. But the UK is entitled to expect the support of America and Gulf forces in the Strait before placing its servicemen and women in harm's way. Sir Keir may not want to join Trump's war, but the conflict demands a British response. When the dust settles, the Gulf states will remember who it was who stood by their side. Do we have an obligation? Should Starmer send ships, assistance in whatever form over there, particularly with that almost pinch point at the moment, which we're more than fully aware of, the Strait of Hormuz, which is where the oil tankers are stuck. This could get even worse as more blockades could be planned by Iran and Iranian embassies. So there's a good point made in that Times leader, but Keir Starmer, it seems, is absolutely sticking to his guns.
While taking the necessary action to defend ourselves and our allies, we will not be drawn into the wider war.
We will not be drawn into the wider war because we know what Keir Starmer really thinks.
The UK was not involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel.
Ugh, gets better every time you hear it. So, do we have an obligation here? Do we have an obvious obligation in some form? It ain't going to be aircraft carriers. Trump don't want them. We haven't even got them. So there is that. But there are other forms of help that could come in the direction of this war, particularly on the Strait there, where there is a genuine, real urgency, and it's only going to get worse. It's getting worse by the hour, as it turns out. Should we assist in that kind of respect? Should the UK be offering more assistance to America? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Duncan Barks is with us, political commentator, and of course, firmly on the team sheet now here at Talk. Afternoon to you, Duncan.
Afternoon, Ian. How's it going?
It's as good at this end. All good. I mean, on this very point, look, it was Trump and Israel's war. They didn't collaborate with anyone, not so much a phone call to any of those allies that he talks a lot about. So there is an issue there. However, we are where we are and we can't turn back the clock, and we are to a degree involved because of our military bases that have assisted America. What should our response be, Duncan? Do we have an obligation to step up to the plate here?
I think we do. It's about supporting one of our long-standing allies. I have a small amount of sympathy, a very teeny-weeny amount of sympathy with Keir Starmer, because he is dealing with an American president who is unpredictable in a way that previous presidents have not been. So I do have a degree of sympathy for the situation he finds himself in. But ultimately, America is one of our long-standing allies. We should be doing something. But there's a bigger issue here, and you alluded to it earlier. You know, this particular situation just lays bare how appalling successive governments have been, not just the current one, previous governments, when it comes to salami slicing the defence of the nation in terms of our army, our RAF, and particularly our Royal Navy. Now, you're talking to me in West Sussex, 15 miles that way is Portsmouth, right? Home of the Royal Navy. As a kid, I used to go there. I used to go to these great Navy days where you could actually go on the aircraft carriers, even go in submarines. And it doesn't really happen in the way that it used to. But the thing that I'm struck by is, and you know, I'm a little bit of an old geezer, as you and I both are, in, you know, this is 40 years ago, right? Back then, you'd go around the harbour and you'd see our amazing Royal Fleet, right? The Royal Navy fleet, and the vessels and the destroyers and the aircraft carriers. Now, you can still do it. You can take a little putt-putt boat around Portsmouth Harbour, and it really is a shadow of its former self. And that gets us into this whole area where the world has changed so quickly in the last 4 to 5 years, starting off with Ukraine and where we find ourselves now. And I think one of the reasons that Starmer dithers over this is we simply don't have the capacity and the resource to even send a token vessel down to maybe the Strait of Hormuz or whatever without it being massively complicated. And I think that's the nub of this.
Yeah, and there are other ways, I guess, that we could help. I know we have some sort of drone capacity. Certainly, we can't change the fact that as far as, if you ask the Iranians, is the UK involved, they would say, yes, they are. Yeah. And they're as much of a target as anyone else for us.
Yeah, and Starmer's, it was interesting looking at all of the clips and listening to the clips you played out there. His language is so important. He's not committing to anything, is he? He's just like, dare I say it, pussyfooting around, saying this, saying that. Oh, it's defensive, it wasn't offensive. Well, listen, if you're part of the regime in Iran, you see Britain as a target, right? Yeah. Quite simply because we were shooting down missiles and drones. So consequently, we are seen on not being on their side. Sure. That makes us vulnerable. So we need to be doing what we can to support the United States of America. And for all talk viewers and listeners, I'm not advocating for one moment boots on the ground. I don't think that is the answer. However, I do think when it comes to logistics and other support, we should be stepping up to the plate. And this has never been more important because the world has changed. Trump talks about NATO, and he's right about NATO. Up until him going back into the White House, NATO funding from many member states was pretty poor, and he's put down his marker, just saying you need to pay your fair share. And this is an example where we need to see NATO states coming together and supporting a fellow NATO member, which is the USA. And actually, it's not going remarkably well at the moment because people are scared. And also what you have to consider with Starmer, this is about his domestic agenda as well. Right? Of course, this is one of the most unpopular prime ministers since records began. He knows that if he goes too far in one direction in terms of supporting the USA and Israel in this war against Iran, he will upset two groups of people. One will be his rump of Labour backbenchers who make life very difficult for him and he's quite scared of them. And secondly, certain communities within Labour constituencies, which would be the Muslim vote, who he doesn't want to upset either. Indeed. And that's driving, I suspect, a lot of his reluctance to actually put down a marker and say, this is what we're doing. Joining that point is the following point I want to make, which is he's an indecisive man and we don't know what he thinks about anything because he doesn't have a vision. And that gets us into the wider domestic issue where we find ourselves as a country, because if you asked 100 different people out on the Clapham High Street, what does Keir Starmer stand for, you would get 100 different answers. And that's one of the reasons why I believe he's one of our worst prime ministers on record, because we don't know what he's about. Yeah. At least with Blair, we knew what Blairism was about. At least with Margaret Thatcher, we knew what Thatcherism was about. With Starmer, he doesn't know what he thinks about stuff. He's a man of no conviction. And that feeds into all of his problems at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. And I think also with the Strait of Hormuz, the problem down there, this area, this avenue is where a fifth of the world's oil and gas comes from. I mean, this is significant. So in that respect, it is a priority. Whatever the implications are for Keir Starmer and those on the left of his party, whatever people think about the Americans not having wider talks with its allies before this happened, we are where we are. We can't change that. A fifth of the world's oil and gas is now being held to ransom. Britain could be involved in mine clearance and all sorts of other areas. We're a leading manufacturer in those cheap interceptor drones, relatively cheap, of course. Couldn't buy them out of a week's wages, but you take the point. We've used them in Ukraine. We could use them in this respect. And of course, when it comes to our allies and the legacy of this story, it isn't just about whether we've pleased the current president in the Oval Office. As I mentioned earlier, it's all those other Gulf states that will remember, were we there to help?
Yeah, exactly that. And that's that old saying, isn't it? Actions speak louder than words. And we need to step up to the plate. Yep. We need to put down a marker and decide who our allies want to be. Because, again, all of this pussyfooting around will do nothing in terms of Iran seeing us as an enemy. They already see us as an enemy.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
So why not actually, if you're going to chuck your hand in, do it properly. That's my view. Again, it's not about boots on the ground. Yep. It's not necessarily about bombing Iran. Israel and America have got that in hand, but we should be doing more logistically to support the situation and doing our bit to secure the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, I was in the local pub last night and people were just going, I just don't think we should get involved because it's only a small amount of oil that particular bit of water is responsible for.
A fifth.
And it's like, sorry?
A fifth of the world's oil.
Yeah, 20%. Well, in my world, 20% is significant. And I would argue most people's world, 20% pay rise, bang on, bobbing. 20% reduction, not so good. 20% is significant. And I get it to a degree because people are reluctant for Britain to get involved in what they perceive as wars that aren't their problem. But actually, this is our problem.
Okay, let's we are taking calls on this as well. Should we, in any respect, help be assisting the Americans, sending aid, if you like, to Donald Trump? Thoughts on that? Lines are open, 03444991000. Also this one, Duncan, now even the wind farm industry, the wind farm industry's trade body is now urging Ed Miliband to allow some North Sea oil drilling. This is the CEO, Tara Singh, has urged that increased domestic energy production of all types, citing the Middle East crisis, will make the UK stronger, safer and less exposed to global energy price volatility. Let's have a listen to Ed Miliband.
Truth is, our country remains in the grip of fossil fuel markets controlled by petrostates and dictators. That's why our energy bills are so high. There is an answer: clean, homegrown power that we control.
That's Ed. He loves it. And Duncan, what is happening here when the head honcho of the wind farm industry is saying, drill, baby, drill? You think something's gone wrong here?
Well, it's because they're a realist. Listen, we should look at how renewables can work, but we shouldn't be in the position we find ourselves in now with Ed Miliband, who is, to be blunt, obsessed by this. And actually, not the sharpest tool in the box. I'm sorry to say, I was watching one of the TV political programs on a Sunday morning with Laura Koonsberg, right? And she was just talking to him about the amount of tax we pay at the pump.
Yeah.
When we fill up our cars and our vans, VAT and fuel duty. And he couldn't quite grasp it because he's not in the real world like the rest of us. I think it's absolutely right to take the position. We should be drilling. We should be, Labour pledged to ban fracking in their 2024 Labour manifesto. We should be fracking. Admittedly, there are some safety concerns, but you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. We should be drilling in the North Sea because it's the obvious and sensible thing to do. And we often talk about the need for border security and how absurd it is that we can't stop these small boats crossing a bit of water, all right, bearing in mind we're an island nation. Alongside border security, it's never been clearer, we need energy security in this country. We need to be 100% self-sufficient when it comes to energy. So the idea that solar panels and wind turbines will provide that 100% in the future, frankly, is for the birds. So consequently, whilst that might make up part of the mix, we know there's North Sea oil to be had. We know that fracking is a possibility and we need to be pursuing it. And anyone who's got a brain realises that there's never been more important to have energy security in this country.
Spot on. Duncan, stay with us. Much more to come. Loads of subjects up and running here on Talk. 03444991000, particularly that question of whether we should send assistance to American allies over there in Iran, what that role could even look like. Your thoughts on that? Lines are open. This is Talk.
The Crown is facing its gravest test in decades, and the royalty from Talk is your front row seat. With royal reputations under pressure and probing questions about public trust, we unpack every twist and revelation with the biggest names in the business. From the throne room at Buckingham Palace to a mansion in Montecito, we follow every royal ripple. Never miss a moment of The Crown in Crisis. Subscribe to The Royal Tea from Talk on the app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk. 22 minutes after 1 o'clock. Should Starmer send support to the Americans over there in Iran? 0344 499 1000. What form could that take? I mean, this business about the aircraft, what are they called? Aircraft, Finn, what are they called? Aircraft carriers, that's the one. The aircraft, we haven't got any aircraft carriers, all right? One's on its way to the Antarctic, the other's knackered, so we haven't got any. That's simple as that. But there are other ways we could help. What are your thoughts on that? Let's move to this story, Duncan. Kent is urgently distributing antibiotics to thousands of students to stop the spread of deadly meningitis. Before, of course, they all go on their Easter break. The Tory MP for Kent is Helen Whatley, has had this to say about the government's reaction.
I think the early focus was very much on the university, but actually within the city of Canterbury there's real mixing between the students and 18-year-olds who are in their last year of school, and that needed really quick acting on, and they need to explain whether they did act quickly enough on that or not.
Yeah, and of course we know 2 people have died, Duncan. One of them would be Helen Whatley's constituent. It's a grim story. There are some still in hospital. Maybe it's contained. Of course, by definition of this, nobody really knows.
Nobody really knows, and it is difficult. I've got a previous bit of skin in the game, having done some work for some political work for the NHS in Sussex, and it's there is, in my experience, fundamentally a problem in certain areas of the public sector and the NHS, which is they're very slow to kind of get things going. That's because it's a vast organisation, even in a county, you know. And I was looking at one of the interviews earlier today, and someone who is responsible for medicine security was saying, look, we had to be sure about this kind of strain. People were in hospital. We had to try and work out what we were dealing with before we put a plan in place. And I absolutely get that. But I think part of the challenge here is you have thousands of students who are scared, some who will know people who have now got meningitis, possibly know someone who's died as a result of getting meningitis in Kent, and they desperately need information. And in situations like this, all people really want is information, to be told what is going on and what potentially could happen next. And I think there has been a little bit of a gap in making that happen. It's awful. I mean, your heart has to go out to the parents who have lost young adults, children,
sure,
in the last couple of days regarding this. I think the only good thing to come out of this now is, as a result of the fact that we're talking about it and chewing it over here on Talk, is people know the situation in the wider Kent area and are themselves taking precautions. One of the things I was really struck by yesterday, I saw an interview on TV with one of the students, and it goes to something we often talk about here on Talk, about the aftermath and the impact of COVID and the pandemic. She said now she's seeing people on her campus wearing masks, and indeed in Canterbury and elsewhere, it's triggering to taking her back to a time when everyone wore masks during COVID. And I thought that was a really interesting comment. And we can see on the screen here people wearing masks. And clearly for perhaps younger generations who are more impacted than maybe you and I, this is hitting them mentally as well as physically.
Well, yeah, and you do kind of look at that sort of social contagion of responses to things. You know, people will remember COVID, and obviously the views on how the government responded, they differ wildly and widely in terms of what they should have done and what they shouldn't have done. But it's got echoes of that, hasn't it? I mean, we're not in that territory, but it certainly has echoes of it.
Oh, we're not in the territory, but you're right. We certainly have echoes of it. And again, look at these pictures here on campus where everyone in that queue pretty much is wearing a mask. You could wind the clock back 5 years, couldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly got that about it. Let's, Duncan, move to this story then. Reform UK Council, well, Kent County Council, talking of Kent, same county, are going to vote on Thursday on declaring an illegal migration emergency over the small boats. This is a 5-page reform report claiming crossings could include potential terrorist cells linked to IS or Al-Qaeda. I've been arguing this since we've been arguing this forever, but particularly since the war in Iran, You might have. I really can't believe this hasn't happened. Maybe you can shine some light, Duncan. We spoke to Chris Philp about this, Shadow Home Secretary. He said he was going to ask an urgent question to the Home Secretary on this point. I don't know whether he did. You would have thought that since the Iran war began, that the channel would be put in special measures. I mean, it should be in special measures anyway. But particularly once that started, the Home Secretary would have gone, right, anyone crossing the channel, we know that Iran form part of the 70% of people that arrive on those boats. Huge numbers, thousands of Iranians have come over the years. Given that we're now at war with this country, you might have thought that there'd be some kind of specific focus on it, like detaining anyone who comes across on a boat.
Yeah, well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? I was going to say, you know, because this is the back door into the United Kingdom. It's not, is it? It's the front door into the United Kingdom.
Yeah, it's not even a sneaky way in, is it?
Exactly. It's a welcome. Come in. You know, Look at the welcome mat. You're absolutely right. Again, I think anyone who's got any common sense will just realise that we really need to take seriously people who are arriving in this country in their hundreds who we don't know anything about. Now, you know, predictably, some of the refugee charities are coming out saying you can't treat them all as terrorists or those who want to hurt us because that is not fair. Well, you know what? The world is not fair, right? And terrorists aren't fair. So let's not muck around with this. If you've got hundreds of undocumented, predominantly young males coming to this country, we shouldn't be working on the basis that all of them want to come over here, integrate and have tea and buns, right? Yeah. It doesn't work like that. Indeed. So we need to treat them with a healthy amount of suspicion. So when they come to this country, we need to keep an eye on them and you know, we need to detain and ultimately deport. And yes, I do accept there might be a tiny fraction of people who are genuine asylum seekers, but I believe that to be a tiny fraction. Yeah. And if they are genuine asylum seekers fleeing something, then they will go through the process and come out the other side. But we can't take the risk at the moment. And we're going to see a lot of people fleeing Iran. And I've always said this on Talk and indeed elsewhere when I write in newspapers and stuff. There's a fundamental issue here. The people who come to this country from other Middle Eastern countries do not necessarily share our values, all right? They treat women in a different way. They have a very different attitude towards anyone who might be lesbian or gay or bisexual or whatever. And consequently, that is always going to mean there's going to be a clash of cultures. Yeah. Right? Basic fundamental 100%. Stuff. Values aren't the same. And that's
it's not even hard to understand this, right? Not even hard to understand, is it?
Yeah, I don't think it's hard to understand. And, you know, if you're one of these refugee charities, it's like it's the elephant in the room, because it's like these people should be treated with respect. They just want to flee tyranny or whatever. And it's just like, right, well, how would they treat a gay person in the country they've just come from? Ultimately, they probably have them hanging from a crane. I'm sorry to use such blunt language.
No, it's true.
That's what we're talking about.
It happens to be true. I tell you what I think is interesting about this, though, Duncan. It will be, or will it be, a bit of a test on how much power a local county council has. Now, Kent, I think I'm right in saying, is the biggest county council in the country. It's absolutely vast. It's reform-led. And there's been a lot of focus on Kent to see whether this is a sort of an indication of what a reform government might look like. They've put this 5-page report together suggesting potential terrorist cells linked to Al-Qaeda and the like. The motion also says extra costs should be funded by the government. That's around about £370 million a year. Sorry, £368 yearly for a Kent family of 4. So they're looking at this to be met by the government. Will the government respond to this? Will anything happen? Will it go anywhere at all? I mean, it's a sign of intent, I suppose, from Reform.
It is a sign of intent. I mean, it's also Reform's flagship county council as well as being one of the largest county councils in the United Kingdom. I don't think it will be treated seriously for political reasons. You will not have this Labour government kowtowing to what they would see it to be, kowtowing to Reform UK. I mean, I think one of the biggest things in this, apart from the security aspect that I've just mentioned, if you're a Kent County Council taxpayer, all right, you are watching your local council bleeding cash as a result of dealing with this crisis. Of course, there is some Home Office assistance, but it's never going to be enough. And you're having to deal with this. I think it's right for Kent County Council to put forward this motion and this document. Ultimately, I don't think the government will take it seriously, predominantly because it's Nigel Farage's Reform UK. And he simply, this is Starmer, would not want to be able to be in a position where he has to go, one of Reform's councils has got a point here.
Yes, he's not. I don't think there's any chance of him him saying that, is there? Listen, Duncan, always good to have you on. Great to speak. Just a reminder, your podcast still going strong. It's called Prick with a Fork, the best named podcast on the planet. Wish I'd thought of it.
You're a very kind man. Can I get literally in 10 seconds?
Yes.
It's a sausage podcast. It's on YouTube. It's called Prick with a Fork. Please subscribe. It's free to do so. There's a cracking interview on there with a great sausage company, a British one, born and bred in the United Kingdom, 1935 in Surrey, called Porky White's. It's a great British sausage success story.
Fantastic. Porky White sounds like an old East End gangster, doesn't he? Fantastic. Love it. Duncan, thank you very much indeed for that. He is Duncan Barks. He'll be back soon on Talk as well. Political commentator and, as you heard, host of the podcast Prick with a Fork. Love it. Should Starmer send support to the Americans? Thoughts on that and anything else we've touched upon there as well. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 25 to 2. We'll come to your comments in just a couple of moments. Donald Trump voicing his unhappiness and surprise at Britain's reaction to the Iran conflict. Of course, criticising Keir Starmer, the US president asserted that the UK should be not just involved, but enthusiastically involved in aiding American efforts to regain access particularly to the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, that is the pinch point. A fifth of the world's oil is there. Do we have a responsibility on this? Let's speak to Chris Parry, former NATO and Royal Navy commander. Always good to talk, Chris. Nice to see you, sir. I mean, we do. I was citing the leader column in the Times this morning, which sort of goes into that territory of, look, you know, this might be America's war. It might be Israel's war. Sure, they didn't contact anyone beforehand. However, we are involved at whatever level we see that. The Iranians would absolutely see us as being involved. We haven't got big aircraft carriers to send over there. I don't think we've got any spare to send over there. But there are other ways we could help. What's your thoughts on this sort of wider issue of Trump being very, very disappointed and unhappy about our lack of help?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to know what the plan is.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a plan for the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, I have one in my mind, but I don't think the Americans have shared that with anybody yet. It's infinitely doable. There's no doubt that we can keep the Straits of Hormuz open. The Americans and Israelis can probably do it on their own to tell you the truth, but they haven't shared a plan with us yet. So I think any government would say, well, hang on, let's see what the plan is, and then we'll see whether we can contribute.
Yeah, and of course, the day before, Mr. Trump was talking about the sort of wider NATO alliance and, you know, come on, guys, we've helped you. Where are you? look, Trump is his own man. He speaks in a different way to most people do in those positions. But many have not unreasonably said, look, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, look, we're not going to give you any intel about the fact we were even doing this, not even a polite phone call saying this was going to happen. And then when things go maybe a little unexpectedly, then suggest that somehow everyone should be obligated to step in. Is that a reasonable criticism of the administration in America?
I think you don't want to tell the Iranians you're about to attack them. I think that's smart, to tell you the truth. It's only Israel and the United States that were involved. Now, NATO's a defensive alliance. It's not designed for offense. It's certainly not designed for offense out of area.
Sure.
You might see NATO one day doing a preemptive strike to stop a major attack. That might happen, but certainly not unless it's in defense of NATO countries. So it's slightly what we would call ultra vires, outside the powers of the NATO agreement. So it's unreasonable. What I think is reasonable is to say, look, the fact that Iran is planning to obstruct the Straits of Hormuz, and there's no real indication they've done that totally yet. They've made sporadic attacks, no more. If they're going to do that, they're actually blocking an international strait that's against international law. And heaven's sake, this government's full of international lawyers. They should be able to see the issue with that. And in some ways, this blocking of the strait should be separable from the war itself. That's the point. If say they were trying to close the Straits of Gibraltar, or indeed the Bab el-Mandeb, maybe if the Houthis get involved, then we'd be screaming about it and saying we need to get warships there now, as we did in the Red Sea, of course, sure, if you remember, to protect shipping there. So once there's a plan, I think you might find that people will be more flexible about committing forces. In the UK's case, of course, we're going to have to look about whether our ships are actually capable of doing it. Because I'm afraid to say all that underinvestment over the years has led to the fact that we are marginal, shall we say, in high-intensity warfare situations.
There are, of course, other ways. As I understand it, Chris, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but we've got a couple of aircraft carriers. One isn't available at all, the other earmarked for the Arctic, and one assumes it's therefore kitted out specifically for that mission, which would differ perhaps, I don't know, from a mission such as Iran. So that availability was never really there. When Trump talks about the Prime Minister refusing that help, the Prime Minister's answer, as I understand it, was, well, we haven't really got that availability anyway, so there was nothing to refuse. But there are other ways, and the piece I was quoting from a little earlier was talking about how the UK is a leading manufacturer in things like interceptor drones, which we've used in Ukraine. That could be one way. And of course, when it comes to allies, it's not just America. There's the Gulf states that will remember what our role was in this. Is that something that we should diplomatically consider?
I think we've got to separate out the attack on Iran from broader regional security and say, how can we contribute to broader regional security? We can also say, look, while the Americans and the Israelis are basically engaged in this major war against Iran, how can we help round the edges? And actually going to the Arctic is one of those, because it's deterring Russia. Sure. In the high north, we can boost our contribution to Ukraine. We can look in those areas where perhaps, the Americans are a bit thin on the ground. About 10 years ago, an American Admiral Mike Mullen said the free world really should combine its navies to protect the sea around the world. He called it a 1,000-ship navy, because if you look at it, the free world can put together nearly 1,000 warships to basically protect the sea lanes and keep the international system going. Yeah. I've said a long time ago in a book that the sea is the physical equivalent of the World Wide Web. Everything that goes, virtually on the internet goes by sea in reality. Yeah. And the cables that carry the internet, of course, are undersea cables. So, the free world's got a real commitment to keep both the choke points, like the Straits of Hormuz, English Channel, Straits of Gibraltar open, regardless of what's going on just off stage.
What does your gut tell you, Chris, in terms of where we might be in a few weeks down the line? Do you think it's inevitable that there will be some level of assistance from this country to the Americans and the Israelis? Is that, as sure as night follows day, some are saying, Mr. Starmer will have to step up at some point? Your thoughts?
Well, I think we've got to remember the Americans said this will be over in 4 to 6 weeks. We're only 2 weeks into it.
Yeah.
So we could have a situation where, Iran is defeated. Alternatively, you could have a situation where Iran is held out and the Americans can't prevail in the short term. And then you get a situation where Iran is quarantined, blockaded, or you're subject to sanctions. So it depends what the free world wants in the long term. We can't afford to let Israel and the United States fail in that part of the world, or come visiting us soon.
Chris, on that point, great to see you again. Thank you for your time. He is Chris Parry, former NATO and Royal Naval Commander, knows his way around maritime and nautical matters in this respect. It's interesting just looking at some of the responses on X when we put that question out there. Should we send support to the Americans? I think most people are saying, no, we shouldn't. No, that's not our thing. It's not for us to get involved. Of course, the sort of reality is that we are involved. The fact that we did eventually, after a little bit of to and froing, Starmer did say, OK, you can use our air bases for American aircraft to take off from, both in this country and elsewhere. So that, as far as, if it's about how you divide up the one side and the other, the Iranians would absolutely see us as being involved. They already did, because we've been seen as America's little brother forever. So that was already the case. Do we step up to the plate a little more? Gary is in Ipswich. Gary, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, Ian.
Good.
How's yourself?
Yeah, good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
A little bit of history, but it's not really relevant in today's world. But when we were invaded in the Falklands back in '82, the Yanks didn't come and give us a hand, although Reagan and Thatcher were very close buddies. So we were on our own in that one. So it's a little bit of, But the thing is that we have the capabilities of areas around the world where the Yanks can use, and we should have offered them straight away. And said to him, look, we're short on armour and manpower as such, and explained the situation as sensible adults would do. And Starmer, if he's trying to make excuses, he didn't do a very good job, which is relative to the type of people we've got in Parliament at the moment. None of them are doing a very good job. We're now putting ourselves at risk over supplies for food, energy, oil, all the things that make up a growing country.
Yep.
We're now going to be talking about people not being able to work, not being able to earn a living, not being able to feed their families, all because the last 30 years, mostly, they haven't done the infrastructure and the types of things that this country needed. They've increased the population, but they haven't done anything to help the ordinary man and woman in this country.
Do you think, in terms of the next couple of weeks, because that's arguably going to be, pivotal, where this goes next? The Americans and along with the Israelis can do all their bombing of, if you like, the big stuff. This problem they've got on the Strait out there, where we've got oil held to ransom. The Iranians seem to have this sort of endless supply of disrupting drones, which aren't in themselves the greatest bit of military hardware, but they do the job of curtailing and stopping oil getting through and the like. Is that going to be a standoff now, do you think, Gary? Are we just going to sit here for the next couple of weeks going, what happens next? Who blinks first?
No, I would have thought that with today's technology, they should be able to let the tankers go through the Straits of Hormuz, up through the Suez Canal. But for some reason, I've heard that maybe a US aircraft carrier was actually hit by drone attacks. Whether that was true or not, because you can never tell what's on the internet anymore. So
this is true.
If that's true, then perhaps the technology to save ships being attacked isn't as efficient as it should be. So if these tankers, and again, the reports I'm reading about the numbers of tankers in the world and how the different countries around the world want these tankers on a regular supply basis, and if they're interrupted, we as a country, we're one of the countries that haven't got enough reserves to see us through a long period of time.
So for us, this could get pretty tricky then.
I think so, and the money people are already making money out of this war because they've increased the prices prior to the oil that isn't coming in. They've already put the prices up to extortionate amount, and everybody, I don't care who you are, if you go to work to earn a living, you are short of money at the moment.
Correct. Gary, on that point, thank you, mate. Great start from Gary in Ipswich. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. When you hear what Donald Trump said about this country should be enthusiastically involved in aiding American efforts to regain access to the Strait of Hormuz. So enthusiastically involved. There is a reality here. It may well have been the Americans that started it. It may well be the Americans. If you're not a fan of Donald Trump and don't like what he's done and disagree profoundly with what happened in those initial attacks between Israel and America, even if you believe that, we are where we are. I know that sounds like a vacuous phrase, but that is the reality. There is a problem in that strait. It needs to get sorted. Should we help? 0344 499 1000.
The Crown is facing its gravest test in decades, and the royalty from Talk is your front row seat. With royal reputations under pressure and probing questions about public trust, we unpack every twist and revelation with the biggest names in the business. From the throne room at Buckingham Palace to a mansion in Montecito, we follow every royal ripple. Never miss a moment of The Crown in crisis. Subscribe to the royalty from Talk on the app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Sean in Gloucester says, afternoon, Ian. Donald Trump is singling out Keith Starling because he dithers over everything and will not maintain a stance on anything. Trump respects strength and our idiotic Prime Minister has none whatsoever. I mean, you heard it there in the clip that we played when, and I think this is, look, it does, American administrations function different to British administrations, and, you know, they all differ a little bit. And when Starmer said to Trump, look, I'd have to contact my, you know, I'll have to talk to my team, my people. Trump's response is, no, you don't have to do that, mate. You are the Prime Minister. You can make that decision. And, of course, that's the difference. We function in a very different way, and our democracy is not based on one man or woman simply making an autonomous point. They go back and they thrash it out with their cabinet, they thrash it out with their advisors, etc. And that's how it works. And Trump's saying, well, stop it. Just make a decision, Keir. Make a decision, man. And of course you could if you wanted to. But that's largely been, you know, I keep banging on about this. Where's the anger from, you know, where's that furnace of incredulity in the pit of your belly, Prime Minister, when it comes to issues like immigration or hate marches, the anti-Israel stuff we saw at the... Where is it? Why are you not getting animated about this? Because they have to wait for a press release before they know what to say. So I know Trump is the one that stands out as being different rather than all the others, but there is something refreshing about having a leader in Trump who does tell it like it is. He doesn't always get it right. I mean, you have to take the bad with the good. There's often problems with that approach. Mark is in Lincolnshire on this issue of supporting the Americans. Mark, what are you thinking? Hi.
Hi there, Ian.
Hello.
Hello, mate. Yeah, I think, like a lot of people are saying, really, I think there was a certain way that Starmer could have gone about this, really. You know, he could have had a private conversation with Trump, been really honest with the guy, you know, our limitations, you know, which are quite obvious. And in which case, that stuff could have been kept private. Whereas Starmer's approach, what it's essentially done is basically, because Trump being the way Trump is, has basically now broadcast to the world that we're weak and we're useless and pathetic, which is not a good look.
Although he's getting, it does seem that the rest of the sort of NATO alliance, or unless I stand to be corrected on this, Mark, I don't think anybody is capitulating to his requests, are they?
The problem is, Ian, what happens going forward? Because if you start getting a bit of a rupture in the NATO alliance, then you basically, what Starmer is doing and the rest of the European leaders are doing, is playing into Russia's hands at the end of the day, because they're loving this.
Sure.
You know, so this is why, you know, they should offer some limited, you know, support, if you know what I mean. Because at the end of the day, if we start getting in bother with the Russians, who's ultimately going to help us out, Ian? It's not going to be the French and the Germans, is it?
Well, you see, this is the interesting game that's being played now, isn't it, in terms of the sort of geopolitical relationships that we have. You know, if we're stuck, and I doubt whether it'll just be us on our own, but what are America going to do in terms of their response going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he's playing... I can understand where Starmer's coming from. You know, we're very limited, and certainly from his position, you know, as a Labour leader, you know, it does have to be he has to walk a very tight line, doesn't he, at the end of the day?
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the way he's approaching it is completely wrong. I just think, you know, there's a lot he could have done behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Instead of making us, as now, making us look incredibly weak.
Indeed. And there are, you know, I mentioned that, you know, that the piece earlier that I was quoting, that there are other ways that we can assist. We don't have to just be, you know, sending planes and aircraft carriers somewhere. There are other things that can be done. And, of course, the other member states of that region will look at the UK and say, well, what did you do when this region needed your help?
Yeah, well, this is the problem, isn't it? You know, as I said, you know, it's making us look weak across the world stage at the end of the day. Whereas at one time, you know, our support of any American action was really without question, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But that worked out in the other way as well, didn't it? Because what that also meant was that literally nobody else in the world would ever mess with us in any real way, because they knew America would be straight there. And now you have to ask the question, is that going to be the case going forward?
Is that going to be the case going forward? And that's a fundamental question to this whole story, and one that I think, Mark, is going to be explored on a pretty regular basis. Listen, I've got to move, but thank you, Mark, for starting us off. I want to get a word in from Andrew in Hertfordshire on this whole situation of what our involvement should now be. Trump doubling down yesterday, Andrew, on the fact that the UK should enthusiastically be involved in this particular element of the battle. What do you say?
Well, it's that whole thing, party over country, isn't it? So if you think of the Labour Party and around the table, they all know in the cabinet that Starmer's done in May. We're only a month away from May in real terms. So you can't change prime ministers during a war. So that's why we'll stay out, because Miliband, who'd want to take on being a prime minister when we're at war with Iran, a Muslim country? That's the problem they've got. Whereas what we should have done at the beginning said, soft power, the bases are yours. What intelligence do you need? What planning do you need? How can we help you? Yeah. This is where our resources are. We've played this completely the wrong way, and we're stuck with Starmer now until the war ends.
Is it too late for, again, this point about, you know, we're now involved because we're affected by this blockade, if you like, over there in Iran on the Strait. So whether we like it or not, you know, you could be an ardent lefty of the Green Party, if you like. Everyone's got to acknowledge now that this is costing us. This is costing us in terms of oil. It's costing us in all manner of different aspects and ways because of that. So whatever we think of Trump, whatever we think of how it started, whatever we think he should have done or shouldn't have done, this is now the reality.
Yeah. So you look at Tesla, you know, who hangs around with Trump, and you look at Larry Ellison, and you look at the American mentality. Capitalist system, move fast, break things. If Microsoft moves their technology, it's down to the partners that interface with that technology to put in place a roadmap. So what he's done here is he said, right, NATO was not going to act. We were threatened. We've done it. It's down to you. You want oil below 250? Get in the Straits of Hormuz and sort it out. And just like you say, quite brilliantly, we're in, and we should have had a better approach to this. But because Starmer can't hand over the leadership of the Labour Party and the country when we're at war, we are in inertia.
But do you think, just a final point, Andrew, you know, Trump says in that Oval Office comment yesterday that the UK is the Rolls-Royce of allies to America. If that was the case, should Trump not have contacted Starmer before they went in and explained a little more about what he was intending?
Okay. Starmer is the head of an anti-Semitic, extremist Muslim sympathetic party. Would you phone him?
I don't know if that really defines where he's the head of an extremist Muslim party. I mean, that's ISIS, isn't it? I mean, look, there's a few oddballs in there, but most of them are just daft lefties.
We'll declare that a draw.
All right, Andrew, great call as ever. Thank you. Andrew in Hertfordshire. One here says, my thoughts are Trump was wrong to start this, but just like when you are out with a mate or a family member and they cause a problem, you don't walk away. You have to back them. And I think that's kind of where we're at now. What do we do? What form could that assistance take? Should Starmer send support to the Americans? 0344 499 1000. Lines are open. You can drop us a voice note there as well. Right now the time is 2 o'clock on Talk. Let's get the latest news headlines.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Afternoon, welcome back to the home of common sense. Loads to get through. As you've been hearing, Donald Trump criticising Keir Starmer, expressing surprise and displeasure at Britain's response to the Iran war. The US president insisted that the UK should be involved enthusiastically in helping American forces reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That is clearly the pinch point at the moment for the Americans. Should we assist? And in what form would that assistance take? Also this afternoon, the chief executive of one of the country's top renewable energy bodies has urged Ed Miliband to approve increased North Sea drilling to secure domestic energy supplies, citing, as you would expect, the Middle East crisis and volatile prices. When the chief of the Renewable UK department is telling you to drill, baby, drill, there's surely a problem. We'll talk about this in just a moment. And Kent is implementing emergency measures, including antibiotics and vaccinations for thousands of students to contain a deadly meningitis outbreak before the Easter break and prevent a national spread. More on that story and, of course, as it develops as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find it. You leave a voice note there as well. You can message 87222. Deborah says, just to remind anyone out there who hasn't got it yet, the US-Israeli war against the IRGC is not just about Iran blackmailing the rest of the world over oil deliveries. It is the nuclear threat of a genocidal Islamist regime bent on taking over the West, either through physical aggression or stealth. The UK is as much a target as any other Western country, so it should be taken the treaty seriously and join the fight to stop its progression westwards. That is absolutely one. I know, and thank you, Deborah, for that. There's more than one person has pointed that out. There's a lot of pretty senior politicians, left and right, that argue that this is, forget the specifics. This is a much wider issue over the kind of Middle East that we have going forwards. We'll return to that subject in just a few moments. But first, as I just mentioned, even the wind farm industry's trade body is urging Energy Secretary Ed Miliband to allow more North Sea drilling. Now, the CEO, Tara Singh, has argued that increased domestic energy production of all types, citing the Middle East crisis, will make the UK stronger, safer and less exposed to global energy prices and volatility. Let's have a listen to the Secretary of State on these issues, Ed Miliband.
The truth is, our country remains in the grip of fossil fuel markets controlled by petrostates and dictators. That's why our energy bills are so high. There is an answer: clean, homegrown power that we control.
Let's get a word on this from Naila Merabova, who's an oil and gas expert, executive strategist and social solutionist to global leaders. That's a heck of a title, Naila, you got there. Good afternoon to you, by the way. Nice for you to be with us. I mean, this is extraordinary, isn't it? The wind farm industry saying, drill, baby, drill. What's going on?
Well, good afternoon, Ian, and thank you very much for having me here. It is indeed important to talk about issues of such incredible significance beyond the prism of complex geopolitical concepts. I'm a strategist, as you rightly mentioned, and for me, strategy is understanding patterns in a stream of decisions, or rather, into these streams of decisions. Sure. And I would like to start with the global overview of what we're actually dealing with.
Okay.
If we look at the global reserves, we're talking about 1.7 trillion barrels of oil. Venezuela having the largest reserves, around more than 300 billion barrels. Then comes Saudi Arabia, around 267. Then comes Iran, holding 209 billion barrels of oil. In this context, if we think about UK and where we stand, the UK holds around 4 billion barrels of estimated reserve and around 1.5 billion barrels of proved reserves. If we look at the consumptions, annual consumption of oil in England, it's around 500 million barrels of oil.
Sure.
Which basically gives us 3 years of oil if we want to rely on ourselves. However, if we look at the situation with Iran right now and the Straits of Hormuz being closed, we basically are talking about a transit hub for 20% of oil and 25% of LPG. Though the UK does not depend on Iranian oil, we're talking about a commodity, a global commodity, where the price of oil in one spot, it basically affects the price of oil in the UK. So we are basically subject to the Iranian, not barrels, but volatility. And in this context, it is absolutely globally, it's absolutely important for the UK to ensure that we have enough oil, enough petroleum, enough energy to provide for the needs of the population.
So when we hear a trade body announcing that, you know, we might need to go back to the North Sea where we've essentially stopped drilling for oil, does that sound to you, Nyla, like just a sensible approach? My understanding of this is that you can't just send a couple of boats over to the North Sea and some barrels and scoop out some oil. There's a time element to this.
Oh, absolutely. You know, we speak about the imports. The UK imports 58% of its energy right now, currently. And the majority comes from Norway. If we speak about gas and LPG, it comes from the US and Qatar. So basically, we are speaking about the North Sea as the main provider of our oil at this stage.
Sure.
As I mentioned before, the estimated reserves at 1.5 billion, which is enough only for 3 years at the current consumption. It will solely depend on what we have. And you're absolutely right. There is a time element in developing oil fields. If we speak, we need to distinguish between exploiting, basically optimizing the current fields that we have, and exploring new fields, new opportunities in the future. Both of them take time, up to 10 years in some cases.
Did it seem, Nyla, to you when the British government appear to have, I know there are some oil-based activity still goes on, but broadly speaking, this is very much, no, we finished with that world. We don't do oil anymore. We're about the windmills. We're about the solar panels. We're about anything other than oil. And Mr. Miliband clearly feels very almost evangelical about this point. Did that seem to you to be over-egging things somewhat and to our detriment, in that it means that we have no options if we start throwing concrete down holes so that nobody can get in there to drill anything, and we cease to explore anything about the North Sea anymore? Was that energy suicide for this country?
Well, I wouldn't talk about energy suicide. There are always solutions. There are new technologies developing. And if we look at fracking, for instance, and that is probably not the solution for the UK, but it turned the US from an importer to exporter of oil. So there's always new technologies developing. And what we need to understand, that the prices of oil were at the level above $100 per barrel even before, in 2008, in 2014. So this is not something new that we are asked to deal with at this point.
I always seem to make this point about the Chinese, who are criticised for all manner of things across the planet, and perhaps rightly so in many respects. But they seem to have adopted a kind of hybrid system where they are the greatest manufacturers of wind power and solar, and they have more of it, I think, collectively than anywhere else on the planet. However, they've continued in parallel with their new technology to exploit their existing technology of coal, oil, etc. So They're running it side by side, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. In 2022, there was a decision made to basically gradually stop the imports of Russian petroleum. And at that point, around 20% of diesel was coming from Russia. And then we became dependent on basically on the North Sea and on the Middle East. But what we haven't done and probably didn't do at that point, we didn't develop a strategy of how to utilize what we currently have, explore.
Correct. And that one would assume that was I appreciate the heady levels of strategy that you work in, but most, a school kid could work out you need a strategy for this stuff. And it does appear that a kind of ideological approach, a political approach almost, as distinct from a more pragmatic one, has been employed.
Absolutely. But you see, that's why it's important to understand the patterns of the present, the patterns of the past, because we live in a very volatile world. And unless we understand the cornerstones with which we can operate, it's very difficult to maneuver in a constantly changing global environment.
Indeed. I don't think the word volatility featured in the memo when they started planning their next steps. Listen, Nyla, great to have you on with us. Really interesting stuff and compounding what many people are concerned about. That's Nyla Marbrova, who is an oil and gas expert and a strategist in this area. And what she said there, I thought was really interesting. You've got to have, that exposes everything, doesn't it? What she said, I don't think she intended it to be a personalised at Ed Miliband, but rather than having this almost zealot-like approach to, no, we're not having none of that oil, none of that coal, none of that, no, we're doing wind, we're doing solar panels, and that's it. Move on, please, nothing to see here. And as she said, a strategy where you go, well, there might be some bumps in the road and you need a contingency plan. Where's your contingency plan? Oh, we haven't got any because we filled up the wells and we've stopped doing stuff in the North Sea. Could that come back? I mean, can somebody enlighten me? The status of the North Sea. So it's, whilst Norway are doing their bit, has our bit completely finished? Is that a barren wasteland of once healthy amounts of rich oil? Have we just stopped? Is there some business going on out there? And if we started again, how long would that take to get things up and running? Or is it just too long to almost begin again, if that is the way to define the story? I will bow to your knowledge on that. There's often a lot of fairly insightful armchair experts who tuck into this kind of stuff almost as a hobby, because it is fascinating once you're in the rabbit hole. Thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000. Back to your calls. Reference the question, should Starmer send support to the Americans? Michael is in Whitley. Michael, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Hello. I'm no expert like the previous caller, but I'm just a Brit, and I'm thinking from the British side of things.
Yep.
What is the real relationship with America and the benefit of this for us to kind of be dragged into these problems? I mean, you've got a rash president. It's not the country of America that is of a different time, maybe a time of more rationality and openness to different opinions. He's blatantly gone in public and spoken about taking over Greenland. Is that something we're going to assist in as well? And if not,
he's talking about Cuba as well today.
Yes, yeah.
But I mean, Cuba's found itself on the list, and in fact, he said, which I thought was rather interesting, when it comes to Cuba, he was asked, he threatened to topple Cuba's government, asked if he meant diplomacy or military. He said, whether I free it, take it, I can do anything I want.
Yeah,
they're the kind of words you might expect from North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't seem to pick a problem with North Korea, someone that I think he couldn't take on. So he seems to always pick on the people that he believes are lesser than the American power, and tries to play Mr. Diplomacy with these countries. I just think there's a concern in the British population when we start labelling this as, oh, if your brother gets in a fight, you need to defend him at a nightclub. Do you know what I mean? Defending your mate at a nightclub might end in a headache.
True, but then you're right about that, but there is an argument, Michael, that we are kind of already in it and suffering some of the consequences.
I think that's self-reflective. I think when you go against humanity to the extent that America has, if you latch onto them as a world power and as an ally, I think you need to suffer certain consequences. And luckily in the UK, these are only financial. I mean, we're talking about countries where America, on the first day of the war against Iran, they bombed a girls' school and killed over 100 young girls. So
they denied that, of course.
Of course, they deny that. I mean, who would want to beat their chest and be proud of such a thing? But I think when you have to look in context here. I think, our oil's gone up a little bit and whatnot.
But British lives are not being lost. I mean, I hear that side of it as well. Michael, thank you. You do articulate the confusion of this picture. This is not about kind of left versus right. One top US counter-terrorism official has just resigned over the war in Iran, urging Trump to reverse course. Now, put that together with people like J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ron DeSantis, these kind of hawkish, full-on, very proud right-wingers who are fiercely against the war in Iran. So it doesn't just divide down left or right lines. Interesting. That's why you haven't heard much from J.D. Vance lately, by the way. 0344 499 1000. Dave in South Gloucestershire says, what an asinine statement from Miliband. Clean, homegrown energy that we control. How do we control the wind? How do we control the sun, says Dave. Well, if you're Ed Miliband, you have a kind of godlike quality. That's how you do it. Really, Dave, you should have thought about that. Dear old Ed is kind of one step away from Jesus. 0344 499 1000. You want to drop us a voice note, that's where you do it. And of course you can message on 87222. It's 20 past 2. This is Talk.
Conflict breaks out anywhere in the world, it has consequences here at home. Talk War is your definitive national security briefing. From the conflict in Ukraine to the tensions in Gaza and the latest escalation with Iran, this is where you'll find comprehensive comment and expert analysis with multiple updates throughout the day. The Talk War podcast from Talk, available on the Talk app or wherever you get your podcasts.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. How do you... I guess this question about should Starmer send support to the Americans depends on how you frame the problem, right? I mean, if this is just about, oh, here's a country that was of no threat to anyone whatsoever, and they've bombed the life out of it, then those arguments might be a little more authentic and understanding. But we are, of course, talking about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a absolutely lethal, horrendous terrorist organisation powered by a lethal and horrendous Islamist regime that has been throwing all manner of terror-based activity across the Middle East for years, whether you're looking at Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, whatever, or however you want to frame it. So you could just look at it like that and say, well, you know, this is just a very bad place. And there is a genuine thirst from the Iranian people, it seems. I don't know what a pie chart looks like when they ask what regime change should, how it should manifest over there. Certainly there is a sense, when we've spoken to Iranians, that they would like things to revert to how it once was. Pahlavi running the show and the country becoming a secular nation, as was previously the case. I don't know how does that appetite square with others who perhaps aren't quite so against the Iranian regime, strange as that sounds to us sitting here, but we know we've got thousands of them in this country who were mourning the death of the former Ayatollah. Tony is in Lancashire. What are you thinking on this one, Tony? Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian.
Hiya.
I was just saying to the lady then, the world has got monsters in it. Putin's a monster. The guy over in North Korea is a monster. Iran is headed up by monsters. And Trump's a monster.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a friendly monster, sort of. I don't like the way he goes about things. I don't like the guy as he is. However, he's doing the dirty work that we should all be doing. I would have liked it had he have approached us all and we could have done something about this, but I do believe the Iranian regime needs toppling. I believe it has the ability to be worse than what the Nazis were. They want to annihilate every Jew off the planet, which is what the Nazis wanted to do. They also want to annihilate everybody else, your LGBTs, your Westerners, your Americans, you know, the little Satan and the big Satan. They won't be happy until everybody's gone, only for the fact that they're a bit rubbish with the technical side of stuff. They haven't done it. The Germans were advanced back then. The Iranians aren't, but sooner or later they're going to get their hands on a nuke, whether they develop.
So I mean, that's largely the kind of thinking, isn't it, behind Israel and Trump? Precisely that.
Absolutely, and like I say, it's the dirty work. We all sort of, you know, turn our heads and sort of shake our, you know, you shake, oh, he's a horrible man, that Trump fella, but he's doing the dirty work that needs to be done.
What about this? I mean, that again, I said just before we started speaking, Tony, the way this one divides up, it's not left wing and right wing, is it? Because you have people like J.D. Vance. You've just had this top official on counter-terrorism has just resigned from Trump's team, and he said his name is he was the National Counterterrorism Centre Director. Joe Kent said that Iran posed no imminent threat to the US and claimed that the Trump administration started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. And now he's left. So you've got people like that saying this is the wrong thing to do. J.D. Vance, I mentioned a couple of other, you know, fairly hefty right-wing voices who are against this. There's a big body. You know, the Trump thing, you know, no more foreign wars. What happened to that? So not everybody is on board with just getting rid of the evil regime, even if they notionally agree with it.
Oh, I don't think there's that many people are on board with it, because they, you know, as long as we're okay, then why should we get involved?
Yeah.
It's like what you see now. When you see somebody getting mugged in the street, people would rather pull the phone out and video it than actually step in and help.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, just on a massive scale.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm old school, and I've got that sort of old idea where you try and fix stuff. You know, when you saw January this year that there was 20,000 plus Iranians being murdered on the street by their own people, you think, how long do you put up with this?
Well, that's true, isn't it? I mean, is there... I mean, there is a school of thought that, well, it's not for anyone else to interfere with that. But then there's another one that says, well, hang on, surely, and bearing in mind the location of this country and its strategic positioning in the Middle East and its potential power, militarily speaking, you know, there is a... You can see the argument for outside countries like America to get involved in removing the regime.
Absolutely. They are the head of the snake. And, you know, you look back through all the terror attacks that have gone on around the world, the Manchester bombing, what happened on the 7th of October in Israel. And I know, unfortunately, part of this country probably cheered when that happened.
I'm sure it did. But I guess one of the other issues, Tony, is that, you know, there are many countries around the world that are run by wrong-uns and despotic regimes that do horrible things to its own people. There's loads of... We don't even make their headlines, but they're certainly out there. Listen, Tony, I'm going to have to move just to get more voices on before the break. Thank you to you, Tony in Lancashire. This is Tony in Manchester, just down the road. Tony, what are you thinking? Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Thank you for taking the call. Both of my sons have drug problems, and I've worked in treatment. I've been on another programme about it. 90% of Britain's heroin comes from Iran. It has to use Iran from Afghanistan. It then goes to Turkey, but the staging post is Iran. It's well known that most of the dealers in Manchester are Iranian, that they have a massive heroin problem in Iran, right?
It's interesting.
And it turns out that nobody's been thinking about what a really good thing it is. The fact that it has to, so it comes out of Afghanistan into Iran, based a staging post, and then it's sent by sea and containers. So I'm thinking that's a really, you know, that for a lot of reasons that this is a really good idea.
So it's not to you, because of your own circumstances and totally understandable response. It's not, you know, the oil not getting through, it's the heroin not getting through that you're quite...
Well, I'm happy about
pleased
that as a byproduct of what's happening, but I'm appalled at the mainstream media because I watch a lot of news, and there's the voices of... what you've just actually been saying about the appalling people that they are, the regime, and the amount of money that we're spending around the world to counter terrorism, to thwart their efforts to destroy us all, let alone the actual principle of it. We're going to save money in the long run. And it's just like the previous callers just said perfectly. It's the dirty work that needed doing, and we know that actually, you know, it was Biden that unfroze the assets so that Iran could pay for the October 7th thing. Only weeks later, after they got their hands on the money that he used to get hostages released.
Yeah.
Well, if Trump had been in then, you know, none of that would have happened because he'd have just gone in and took them. Now, it is dirty work and it is horrible, and people are getting killed, and I don't like that. It's awful. But sometimes things have to be done, and good things come at a price.
So there may well be, in this specific area of heroin importation and exportation, there may be a positive. Tony, I have to cut our conversation at that point because we're moving forwards. But thank you, Tony, and I wish you luck as well with your kids as well that have, as you said at the beginning, have struggled in this area. I hope that comes to a clean, literally, solution too. Thoughts on that? 03444991000. Robert Jenrick, the Reform Shadow Chancellor, joins us in just a couple of moments. There's a lot to put to Robert. Big announcements they made this morning about some of their financial plans. What would that look like in government? Thoughts coming next on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It has just gone 2:30. Now, Reform UK plan to cut annual household energy bills by at least £200 by eliminating VAT and green levies. That will be a start, wouldn't it? The policy was announced by Treasury spokesman Robert Jenrick earlier today. Let's speak to him now. Robert Jenrick, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us as ever, Robert. So tell us more about this, £200. I mean, it's a start. I'm sure you'd like to go even further, but tell us a little more about what you announced today.
Well, look, everybody is sick of the rising bills, whether it's groceries when they go to the supermarket, fuel when they fill up their car, or the energy bills that people are facing right now. They just seem to be going up and up and up, and it's got to come to an end. So what we're proposing is two big things. Firstly, we're going to scrap the heating tax, which is the VAT that you pay on domestic fuel. It's been there for 30 years. It's incredibly unfair that a freezing pensioner should have to pay VAT just to heat her own home. It's not been possible whilst we were part of the EU, but it's a Brexit benefit that we can actually get rid of this. And so we're going to scrap it for everyone, and that will save people £85 on their energy bill every year. And then on top of that, we're going to scrap the green taxes and levies that are also on people's bills, and they will save about £115. So together, we're going to save people £200 off their energy bills. You're right to say that we need to go further, of course, because everybody's finding life so difficult at the moment, but it's a beginning, and it shows the intent that at Reform, we want to be absolutely laser focused on the cost of living, lightening the load on people who are really struggling at the moment.
As you know this job of politics far better than I do, Robert. As I understand it, that when you get your job in the Treasury, you become the Chancellor, in you go, and a couple of characters emerge from an office somewhere deep in the bowels of the Treasury and say, right, Chancellor, this is the reality. That's how much money you've got to raise. You can do it however you like, but that figure there doesn't move. So you can take money from here, but you've got to find it from somewhere else. What is your response? Is that just because the status quo, which is those two words, I think status quo is two words, that has sort of reigned supreme, groupthink in so many parts of our system, certainly in the civil service, will always say, no, we don't do things any differently. This is how it works. Would you challenge the way things work, or would you have to do what has happened before, and that's that, we will do this with energy bills, but, unfortunately, we'll have to lob the tax onto something else?
Well, look, we're going to be careful with people's money. That's absolutely critical. And so we're not going to say we'll cut taxes unless we're confident that we can actually do it. And that's why alongside this, we said we're going to save some money. We're going to cut some of the waste that there is at the moment by getting rid of some of the quangos, and we've done a big piece of work within Reform to look at those. And these are these arm's length bodies which ministers have set up over the years, really to shirk responsibility, to give others the ability to manage things with taxpayers' money. And we found at least £2.5 billion of savings from within those, which is going to fund this tax cut for people's energy bills. And, let me give you some examples. We've looked at these organisations which are completely out of control. There's one called Homes England, which helps to deliver affordable housing, but it has over 100 people within it who are paid £100,000 every year. In fact, across all these quangos, more than 1,700 people were working in them in cushy jobs, earning more than 100 grand. The energy regulator, Ofgem, had 1,000 people working in it 5 years ago, so a big organisation by anyone's standards. 5 years later, it's got 2,750 people working in it. Wow. So they're completely out of control, and we're going to really rein them in, end that gravy train, and that's how we'll fund this. We've got to bear down on all the waste at the moment. You see it everywhere, whether it's paying benefits to migrants, foreign aid to rich countries, the asylum hotels. net zero subsidies that we've been talking about today. This amounts to billions and billions of pounds. And I think it's completely outrageous that people are paying their energy bills, and little do they know that a big chunk of the money that they're paying and finding it hard to pay is actually going to these kind of subsidies for net zero, so some companies and investors can get rich. That's going to come to an end. We're going to scrap all of that and bring down people's bills.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Quango thing, I mean, the idea that Ofgem have... If you seriously said to me, I'm a reasonably intelligent bloke, Robert, as I think you know, and I do this for a living. If you said to me how many people work at Ofgem, I would seriously have gone, oh, I don't know, 25 maybe. And it's, you know, it's an organisation that keeps its eye on stuff, you know, basically. Thousands of people working at Ofgem. It's just a crime scene, frankly. But, of course, what's happened in the past, and I remember years ago interviewing the mighty Eric Pickles. You remember Eric, of course, when he was chairman of the party, and him saying, look, if the Tories get in this is pre-2010, I think, you know, we're going to get rid of whatever, that famous phrase, bonfire of the Quangos. And, of course, what tended to happen, and did happen, was, yes, new governments come in, they get rid of the Quangos, but then they set up new Quangos, just with people of their own stripe involved in them. That's been the case in the past. Would a reform government be different to that?
Yeah, well, it's incredibly important that we bear down on all this waste and that we spend people's money with care as if it was our own money, and that we spend money on the actual priorities of the British people. And that's what it comes down to. That is the difference that a reform government has got to give. When we're devoting taxpayers' money, we've got to know it's really in the interest of working people.
Yeah,
it's pretty obvious on whose side reform is. You know, you've got to pick a side in politics. Reform is on the side of working people, and so we're going to be spending money in ways that help them. And if we cut taxes, they're going to be tax cuts that help working people. That's why we said last week that we would scrap the increase in fuel duty so that it doesn't cost you so much when you fill up every time you go to the petrol pump. That's why this week we found the savings to cut people's energy bills. People should know that reform is on their side. We are going to be focused on the cost of living and finding ways to bring down people's bills and taxes for working people.
Do we need I alluded to it there a second ago, just a sort of systemic change, a seismic industrial scale change in just how governments do business. Tinkering around the edges seems to be a national sport in governments, and there'll be a little announcement about something, and then you crunch the numbers and you realise it's going to save the average family about £3.50 a year or something. Doesn't really do what it intends to set out. At the weekend, Ed Miliband got kind of slightly scuppered with a pie chart on the TV. You might have seen that, about a litre of petrol, over, 55% or so goes to the government. That's been the case forever, it seems. People would love to see a reform government under your watch in the Treasury coming in and going, yeah, we're going to look at that as well. 55% in tax. I mean, your litre of petrol could cost about 90p if we took some of that tax off. Now, that's multi-millions of pounds for the Treasury. You've got to be careful what you do, but is that an area you would look at?
Yes, and as I say, last week, Nigel Farage and I were in Derbyshire, where we commandeered a petrol station and cut prices of fuel there to show that we're going to take that very seriously, because, you know, millions of people drive to work, to college, to get about, and, you know, I think successive governments have just not appreciated that. They're maybe full of people who live in cities, get public transport, don't understand how hard it is for the rest of us out there in the country. So we've said, firstly, to Rachel Reeves, she's got to call off this increase in fuel duty that's coming down the tracks in September. That's actually a decision that's on her desk right now, because if she wants to call it off, she's going to have to legislate. She's going to do that quite quickly. But a reform government would go further than just postponing it. We'd actually scrap it altogether, and we'd save people 5p when they fill up for every litre of petrol. Now, you might say that's not very much money in the scheme of things, because people are feeling so hard up at the moment. But you'll see time and again, that was last week. This week we found the money to cut people's energy bills by 200 quid. There'll be more in the future. We're working hard systematically through everything that government does to find the savings to bring down people's bills and make life a little bit easier for people.
Just a couple of final points, Robert. In the last hour or so, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has been speaking, talking about regional leaders. I think she means mayors by this phrase, regional leaders, gaining a control of a share of some national taxes. So giving more power, more money to the regions so people like Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan can spend it more sensibly. That's not a joke, by the way. That would be the reality. Your thoughts on giving mayors more fiscal independence?
Well, the last person I would want to give more independence to is Sadiq Khan. I mean, the amount of damage that he has done in London should warn us all off that. Look, we do want to ensure that there is more power given to local councils and leaders. Reform is doing well in local government, and that's important that we give those people the power and responsibility to be able to drive their local communities forward. Reform is actually, I think it's going to become very clear after May, the only national party where we are doing well in Scotland and Wales, in big cities like Birmingham or places like Sunderland in the north of England, as well as in the Shire counties. We want to spread opportunity across the whole country. And that does mean government working in a different way with those people and those parts of the country. Whether or not you'd want to give actual tax raising powers to those mayors, I remain to be convinced, because most of the mayors, certainly the Labour ones, like Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham, would be hiking taxes, not reducing them. We want to be finding ways of actually bringing down people's bills.
Reform also launched an online draw to pay one entire street's energy bills for a year. I had to read that sentence twice. What's happening here? Was this just a bit of generosity? What's the deal here? What's going on, Robert?
Well, look, it's a bit of fun, but it is to make an important point that we think it's outrageous how high energy bills are right now in Britain, and we want to see them come down. So go on to our website, which is www.nigelcutmybills.com, enter your name and address, and we're going to pick one at random in a couple of weeks' time, and then Nigel and I are going to go round to that house, and Reform is going to pay their energy bill and everyone who lives on their street's energy bills for an entire year. And look, obviously we're in opposition at the moment, and all we can do is campaign, make the point, cut one street's energy bills.
Yeah.
But if we can get a Reform government, then we can do this across the whole country, bring people's energy bills down, ensure that we have cheap and reliable energy for households and also for businesses. That's our mission.
I just had an image, Robert, when you said that you and Nigel will indeed go and knock on someone's door, and you knock on the door of number 58 and Zach Polanski lives there or something. I wonder how he might react to that level of benevolence from Reform. Just a final point. We've been asking this after just away from the brief, your own brief of the Treasury. Of course, Mr. Trump has been talking a lot about his disappointment in this country with our inclusion or lack of inclusion in what is happening with Iran. He believes that we should be enthusiastically involved in freeing up the Strait of Hormuz out there, particularly because of our oil considerations and other issues. What would Reform be doing differently in terms of our relationship? And specifically, we've asked the question, should Starmer send more support to the Americans? What do you say?
Well, look, we've been clear that it was a very big strategic mistake not to allow the US to use those joint bases, particularly Diego Garcia, which they had relied upon for decades. That has damaged the relationship, perhaps fatally, between the president and Keir Starmer. We don't see a role for the UK in offensive action against Iran. We don't want to have British airmen and women flying sorties over Iran, dropping bombs, putting themselves in danger. We should be immensely careful before risking the lives of our servicemen and women and getting involved in foreign wars in distant parts of the world. We've seen where that ends in the past, and I don't think there's much, if any, appetite for that here in the UK. It is, however, in Britain's national interest to get the Strait of Hormuz open so the oil can flow, oil can start to fall, and we don't see the immense pressure on the cost of living continuing. So if there are assets that the UK has that it could put at the disposal of the US for specific and clear missions, and I'm told that the US might like our drone technology and maybe our mine clearing capability, then I think there's a good argument for that, and we should consider carefully how we might do that. But that is a world away from offensive action by British servicemen and women, in which they will be placing themselves in significant danger. So overall, we want to get this war to come to an end as quickly as possible, because our primary concern is the impact that it's having here on people's energy bills and their cost of living. That is putting people under immense strain, and we need it to end as quickly as possible. And that's a message that Nigel Farage has delivered to his own contacts in Washington.
And would a Reform UK, as a party, would you urge the Prime Minister to rethink his current relationship with the American president?
Yes, but it looks like it's shot, to be honest. And it does all go back to that original decision not to allow the US to use bases, some of which they had considered to be joint bases like Diego Garcia since the 1970s. And that's done immense harm. But this is an important relationship. We would be defenseless without the United States, and our energy security would be very compromised, because actually we import a vast amount of liquefied natural gas from the US as well. The relationship is deeper than the present personalities. It will go on. And you can be sure that if Nigel was Prime Minister, you'd have somebody who was a strong person, who had good relationships in the US. That doesn't mean that we always agree. That's a true friendship, where you can speak truth to those people you know well without offending them, and you try and defend and promote the British interests first. So that's what a Reform government would do. We would get the relationship back on track, because it's in Britain's interests to have a productive and constructive relationship on defence, security and energy with the United States.
Robert Jenrick, thank you for your time. Appreciate it as ever. Robert Jenrick, Reform Shadow Chancellor, with us. Your response to what he said, particularly on that last point, that Reform would recalibrate the relationship with the states, but on the finer issues of how they intend to cut annual household energy bills by £200 by eliminating VAT and green levies again. Does that go far enough? We mentioned the litre of petrol conundrum. No political party is going, yeah, we're going to halve the tax on that, because they know it's worth squillions of quid to the Exchequer. If they halved it, they'd have to get it from somewhere else. What is the answer to that one? Your thoughts, 0344 499 1000.
conflict breaks out anywhere in the world, it has consequences here at home. Talk War is your definitive national security briefing. From the conflict in Ukraine to the tensions in Gaza and the latest escalation with Iran, this is where you'll find comprehensive comment and expert analysis with multiple updates throughout the day. The Talk War podcast from Talk, available on the Talk app or wherever you get your podcasts.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This comes in from Gary, who says, can I point out to your earlier caller that there are two reasons why Trump doesn't bother too much with North Korea. Firstly, North Korea does not engage in global terrorism against the US, the West, and against its neighbours in the same way that Iran does. And secondly, North Korea has nuclear weapons, which means that it's bare best left unpoked. It's a bare nest, should that be, left unpoked, because should it choose to, it could actually pose a much bigger threat to the West than a country without nuclear weapons, which conveniently brings us back to one of the main reasons why Israel and the US attacked Iran. Can you just imagine what the fanatical death cult that is the Iranian regime would be like to deal with if they had nuclear weapons? Yeah, you can reasonably, not just reasonably, compellingly argue as to why it's in all of our interest that a regime such as that has not even a moment's capability to consider upping their weaponry and their capabilities, nuclear or otherwise. Just before we talk to Ian in London, it's the Voice of Doom, day 10. This is the mystery voice, but it's political. You're looking for a politician, left-wing or right-wing, young, old, dead or alive. Simple question. Who is this?
There's hardly any experience.
There's hardly any experience, but whose voice is it? Have another listen.
There's hardly any experience.
87222 if you think you know. 87222 if you think you know. Here it is again.
There's hardly any experience.
We'll tell you after the news who it is, but only if we get a correct answer. Currently, I didn't realise this, Ukrainian President Zelensky and NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte are currently in number 10 Downing Street with Keir Starmer for talks. Zelensky and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte currently being welcomed by Prime Minister Keir Starmer at number 10. Anything that comes from that, you will hear it first here on Talk. Let's go to Ian down in London. Ian, what have you got for us? Hi.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Afternoon.
First of all, I'd like to say that we've got to go in the three things we discussed with Robert Jenrick just now. We've got to do it backwards. The one is that basically, yes, once Starmer and even when Trump are out, I think Starmer will actually last longer because of the time with the next election.
Mm-hmm.
But the things will be healed over because, quite simply, this country needs America more than America needs it. So go back with a begging bowl, right?
Does it need America, or do we just need to retain our NATO alliance and that's fine? Because you know America's part of it. It's the chief executive of it, if you like.
Financially and every which way you do it, they're on the tails of it.
Okay.
It's like going back even further. When 1956 was it, when Suez happened, with France and Great Britain went into Suez and tried to take over. They wanted America to join in.
Yep.
America didn't. But then they still sort of made up afterwards and went back and said, like, we're very sorry. I think it was Eisenhower or whoever was in charge at the time there. We were very naughty. We'll make up with you. Right? They do. That is the way the things go. With number 2, I forgot what that bit was, but number 3, more importantly, is these committees and quangos. We know when you've got the COVID inquiry, how many have there been? 4 of those? They only needed possibly 2. When you have the one, unfortunately, with the tower that caught alight in West London, again, about 3 or 4 inquiries.
Yeah.
All these inquiries and everything else, and, you know, when they built Wembley Stadium, I remember it coming out. In somewhere like Germany, it would have taken 3 committees max to get Wembley Stadium built. Here, it takes 133.
Yeah, we are obsessed with, I've discovered this just at a local level with kind of issues around planning and the like, where we have an obsession, the legal system, just on whether it's on a micro tiny level of individuals or whether it's on big structures or inquiries. It's off the scale. I don't know how we got there, why we are the world leaders in quangos, committees, lengthy inquiries and all manner of daft bureaucracy. I have no idea. Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. We absolutely lead the way on that one. I mean, stuff that could be done in a fortnight takes 3 years. Really? How? Here's the Voice of Doom.
There's hardly any experience.
Who's that? 87222 if you think you know. Right now it's 3 o'clock. Let's get the latest news headlines.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Afternoon, yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Later together we are, of course, talking about Donald Trump heaping more criticism on Keir Starmer, expressing surprise and displeasure. Britain's response with the Iran war. The US president insisted the UK should be involved enthusiastically in helping American forces reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That seems to be the pinch point on all of this. Should the UK respond? Should Starmer send support to the Americans? I think we can all agree there are elements of this that is absolutely in our own interest. Now, without getting involved in a wider war. Also this afternoon, the chief executive of the country's top renewable energy body has urged Ed Miliband to approve increased North Sea drilling to secure domestic energy supplies, citing the Middle East crisis and volatile prices. When the chief of the Renewable UK department is telling you to drill, baby, drill, you better sit up and listen, Ed. We'll have more on that and more response from you. And, of course, any updates we get on Kent implementing emergency measures, including antibiotics and vaccinations for thousands of students to contain a deadly meningitis outbreak before the Easter holidays and prevent a national spread. 2 people, of course, have died. 2 very young people have lost their lives. More in hospital. I think 1 still in a coma. It's a serious situation. Authorities down there believe they've got this thing sort of under control as much as they can, but they do have emergency measures still taking place. 4 minutes after 3 o'clock right here on Talk. Jenny says keeping the Straits open is a defensive position. Just as we worked with all nations to keep the Red Sea lanes open, we should have our own national interest to keep the Straits free and trade flowing, keeping international waters free of encumbrances in what the UK has a navy, is what the UK has a navy for. Indeed, I mean, you don't have to be involved in a military set, in the conventional military sense. I know there's a crossover in the Venn diagram here, to believe that we absolutely have an interest in making sure those straits remain free-flowing, but we might be some way off to getting that situation at the moment by dint of what is happening. So back to that story based in Kent. Health officials there are issuing antibiotics to thousands of students to contain this meningitis outbreak. 2 people dead, 11 others in hospital. Officials have been criticised for waiting 24 hours to warn the public after being alerted to a cluster of cases believed to have started in a Canterbury nightclub called Club Chemistry sometime between the 5th and the 7th of March. So this is around about 10 days ago now. Let's speak to Dr. Simon Clark, virologist, who can tell us a little bit more about this. Simon, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Meningitis, we hear about it, we're aware of its dangers, not something you encounter every day. You tend not to meet someone that regularly who's had it or got it, but it is, in its worst forms, as we've seen from this outbreak, potentially lethal. We should take this very seriously.
Yeah, we should. Like you quite rightly say, the actual disease is rare, thankfully, but it has a fairly high lethality rate, and indeed can leave people with neurological damage if they survive it. One thing you did say was that it's fairly rare, but in fact, if you go into London or anywhere in the country and sample the population, you will find upwards of 10% of the population have the bacteria in the back of their throats at any given time. And of course, the vast majority of people never know they've got it, and it never causes them any problem. We don't understand why in some people it goes from a benign carrier state to a more active disease state.
And in terms of dealing with it, a situation such as this, we understand, we hear it sort of started in a nightclub. What is that? What is meant by that? It started in a nightclub. Somebody coughed, somebody spread it, somebody else got it, somebody who didn't have this kind of dormant reaction had the far greater and more lethal reaction.
So it is believed by some people that it would have been one person unwittingly took the infection into the nightclub, and people were sharing vapes, and of course this bacteria, which resides in the back of your throat, spreads on saliva and that sort of secretions from your mouth, and if you share those round, then you have a pretty high risk of contracting the bacteria. That doesn't necessarily, of course, mean that you're going to get sick.
Yeah. So, I mean, a nightclub setting would be, like any setting where there is a containment of people, would be an obvious place where anything can spread, whether it's the common cold or something as awful as this. In terms of the cases we're hearing about, we know 2 people have sadly died, 2 students of slightly different ages, 11 others hospitalised. So something more serious has clearly happened here. One would extrapolate from that. This would be unusual to, as you said, you could go to any nightclub and find people who would test for having the meningitis bacteria there, but this is something more than that. What does that tell you as a virologist?
We really don't know why some people have it as like this benign carrier state and some people get disease. It could be something changes in the bacteria, but so far we've not been able to find what that is, if indeed that's the case. Or it could be that different people have a susceptibility. We really don't understand our own susceptibility towards different types of infection very well at all. So my suspicion is, of course, that it could be a bit of both, a combination of the 2. That's not impossible. But why that happens, we just don't know.
We understand that health officials in Kent are giving out antibiotics and vaccinations as well. Just distinguish for us, if you could, Simon, how would they decide who gets what? What's the deal there?
So my understanding is that they're giving antibiotics fairly widespread to students at the university. I'm not entirely sure where they draw the line, but the vaccine, as I understand it, is just for students who've been residing in the halls of residence. Presumably, they think that's where transmission is most likely to have happened.
And of course, it doesn't take much. You know, there's not just a virological contagion. There is a social one as well. People start hearing about these stories. I already saw it on a local WhatsApp group last night. Parents saying, "I'm going to get my child vaccinated." Some people sticking on masks, which they previously wouldn't have done. Again, maybe some of that is natural. We have been through COVID after all. I know there's varying views on how that was dealt with, but it's understandable that there would be a bit of panic among some, particularly in that location. But even beyond that.
Yeah, it will spark people's anxiety, and there is something that can be done to reduce people's chances of getting sick, and that, of course, is the vaccine. But this age group, these sort of late teens, early 20s, they haven't been vaccinated because they were too old when this vaccine, this Men-B vaccine that's now being distributed, became available. You know, it's only given really to kids preschool, so they weren't given it and they remain a bit vulnerable. You can get it done privately, but of course those stocks are going to be depleted pretty quickly. Is the vaccine for this, the meningitis B vaccine, is that now given out as standard to kids? Yes, it's part of the childhood immunisation programme, yeah. OK. On that point, Simon, great to have you with us, sir. Thank you for your time. Dr Simon Clark, virologist. On that point, you know people will panic about it, and as I said, we're already seeing in our neck of the woods where there are some people, not that it's in Kent, but not near Canterbury, but it doesn't have to be. You know, people hear these kind of stories, and, you know, when young people have lost their lives, and there's been 2 students, I think one a sixth former and the other a student at the university. This is, you know, it's troubling stuff as a parent, because you think, is my kid vulnerable to this? And of course, kids, as I understand it, are more vulnerable than adults would be if they contract this, certainly in its worst form. Let's go back to your calls. Lots to talk about. This is Emma in York. We began with that question, Emma, of should Starmer send support to the Americans? What is your take on all of this? Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me because I'm actually at a cross-country event.
All right, you're not running.
But no, I'm spectating because it's quite windy. Yeah. So I thought I'd just be on Trump's side here, because this is very different to the likes of Iraq, where this isn't just about weapons of mass destruction. This has had Iranian people crying out, protest after protest for years, literally asking for this very thing. And Trump promised them that he would do this, and the IRGC didn't stop attacking their own people, and so he stuck to his promise. So a lot of people say we haven't got an argument in this war, but yet we seem very happy to be very aggressive with Russia, who, in my opinion, hasn't particularly done anything to the UK. In fact, it's often been a very good ally of the UK's. Yet here we are with Iran, who the IRGC is a known terror group. It has been prescribed by most of the world, funnily enough, not by the UK for some reason. And it backed over 20 terror plots just on the UK soil, I think, in recent years. They've obviously attacked now Cyprus. Apparently they had a drone in Baghdad where there were EU diplomats. And yet somehow still Keir Starmer doesn't think we have any reason to back our greatest ally. Now, I do kind of back Trump in the whole thing of what is NATO. Like, if we can't back our military bases, back our biggest NATO ally, what is our role here? You've got India, who've sent warships into the Strait, and yet Rule Britannia, nowhere to be seen. So I just think it's a fair question to be asking, like America has done, about the future of the UK, the ideological stance, and what kind of ally we may be going forward. And I think a major thing that it's also highlighted is just how weak we are. So we've had no money spent on our military. We've had years of telling boys not to be masculine, white man bad, patriotism bad, British history bad. And the whole military, navy, etc., has been belittled and demoralised and run down to a place of non-entity, really. It's just not even there. It's not even in the argument. But like I said, the IRGC needs removing for the people of Iran, for the whole world. I think we have a big state to play, even if it is just in a defensive aspect. We're not being asked to be aggressive. We're just being asked for our military bases.
which is now, of course, the case. But it took Starmer, what, 48 hours to kind of get that one through. There is. Yeah. Would it be fair to say, Emma, that there are lots of other countries? I mean, Spain is, particularly against any kind of assistance. They're very neutral on this, but there are many countries around the world that are very angry about this. They see that this was a bad move from America, and it wasn't the way to do it. They were no direct threat, and as much as we hate their regime, it was not for America to get involved in this. And that's not a minority view globally. What do you say to that?
Like I say, though, we have had 20 IRGC-backed terror plots on just the UK in the last year or so alone. So how they can be seen as they're not attacking anybody is quite ridiculous. They killed around 50,000 people of their own people just in recent months. They're literally hijacking a whole country. As I said, I think when you see, I do question the role of the EU and the role of NATO. Like I said, they're being very aggressive with Russia. Russia haven't stopped oil supply to the UK during this whole time. Iran is obviously doing so. They took out all the Russian diplomats. They haven't done with Iran. They haven't prescribed the IRGC. There's a whole big concerning question about whose side actually are the EU and NATO on at the minute. Like I said, when you've got the likes of India stepping up to help America, it doesn't look very good in terms of what kind of ally the UK...
Have India changed their position now? Because they were also neutral.
Well, I've seen in the press today they've sent 2 warships.
Okay, and they would argue similarly as you just did that this is not offensive stuff. This is
defensive. Yeah,
this is assistance.
Yeah, they're blocking oil and everything. That is, that's a major thing. People need to understand how important that is to everybody and what a nightmare it will be if they literally
absolutely.
Luckily, Saudis helped with a pipeline.
True.
But again, going back to the EU and NATO, like they said nothing when I think Ukraine have blown up a pipeline to Hungary and Slovakia.
I mean, it is interesting that NATO, which is a defensive organisation, could have that is their point, to be defensive. They could have included themselves, particularly in the Straits, on the defensive side. They don't have to be mobilising armies across member states. Do you sense, though, Emma, just a final point, that ultimately the resistance, perhaps, it boils down to previous experiences with Afghanistan and Iraq? Is it that's informed the lack of Western response?
I think so, but I do have greater concerns when people say... Sorry, cheering. When people say Starmer's backing peace, I actually have more concerns about who the real people are that Starmer et al. Are actually backing. That's my major concern.
Love it. Emma, that's a great call. Good luck with the cross-country. One of your kids is running there, I'm assuming, or certainly somebody you know. Thank you, Emma in York. Lots to get through here. 0344 499 1000. Shall we do the Voice of Doom? I think we should do the Voice of Doom. Have we got a winner on the Voice of Doom? Let's have another listen.
There's hardly any experience.
These are some of the guesses. Rory Stewart. Yes, it does sound a bit like Rory Stewart. It's not Rory's. I think there was one the other day, wasn't there, where there's been guessed a lot of Rory Stewart guesses. It's not Rory Stewart. Brian Walden, no. Tony Newton, no. Stephen Crabb, God, I forgot about him. Liam Byrne, Sam Carling, no. Oliver Dowden, no. Robin Cook. Can I just say, it is a political voice, because we've got a lot of people guessing comedians and actors. I do say at the beginning, probably to the point of boredom for some of you, that it's a mystery voice, but it's political, so you are looking for a politician, left-wing or right-wing, young or old. So there you go. Now, talking of winning, we're giving you the chance now to win 2 hospitality tickets to the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. This is Sunday, July the 5th, with full racing green trackside experience. This is quite genuinely and obviously an amazing thing to win. It's the ultimate setup for race day. You'll get exclusive grandstand seats at the Loop and Village Corners, plus inner track access so you can watch the drivers arriving at the paddock. That's not all. Access to the hospitality shuttle bus for easy on-site transport. Big tick on that one. Racing simulators, live music between sessions, all-day street food and an open bar. What's not to like? Let's have a look and find out how you could be in with a chance to win.
for your chance to win, text TALK to 83338. Text costs £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or call 0343 418 7260. Lines close 20th of March 2026 at 4 p.m. That's when you need to answer your phone if it rings. 18 plus UK residents only. This is a network promotion. Full T's and C's at talk.tv/win. So for your chance to win, text TALK to 83338 now.
conflict breaks out anywhere in the world, it has consequences here at home. Talk War is your definitive national security briefing. From the conflict in Ukraine to the tensions in Gaza and the latest escalation with Iran, this is where you'll find comprehensive comment and expert analysis with multiple updates throughout the day. The Talk War podcast from Talk, available on the Talk app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Gary says, I don't think it's so much about the Allies turning down America. I think it's more they are turning down Trump and co. One, they are too unpredictable. And with that comes unreliability, and that is dangerous. I think there is a little bit of there is a sense on that Trump has some enviable qualities that lots of leaders look at and go, I wish I could be a bit like that. And they don't have that kind of, straight talking way. But that is, without doubt, a bit of a double-edged sword. And I think there's absolutely cracking point from Gary. I think there's some leaders that go, we're not sure about this. If your vice president is not sure about it, and many people in your own party are not sure about it, you can see why a leader of another country might have that same view. Tony's in Doncaster. What are you making of this, Tony? Afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what? Gary, to a certain extent, has stole my thunder a little bit.
That's outrageous when that happens.
Well, no,
let's pretend I didn't read Gary's message out.
No, it's all right, because I've got another point. But what I'm going to say quickly is this on the matter, right? Again, it's just a personal opinion, but I've got the feeling, as a normal layman, that since he threatened over Greenland, and the European countries showed a little bit of backbone and all stood together.
Yep.
I think there's a little bit of resentment with Europe now with him, where basically he showed a little bit disrespect to Europe. And I think they've got a bit fed up with these threats. So this week it's tariff this, and you see the stooges sat on the settee in the White House, and he threatens this, and next day he's threatening somebody else. And last week he was with the German delegate, and this week he's fallen out with them, and people are just getting fed up with the threats, which comes to the question that I want to ask you. When is the midterms in America?
November. When's the midterm specifically? Are we looking at November?
Because I'll tell you why I'm asking. Am I right in thinking that if he potentially loses that, and the polls at this minute suggest that he may, will he be in a position where he won't have as much power then after November to pass the things through?
Yes, so, literally that. I mean, the smart 3rd of November, I've just been told. He's got to get everything done in this part of his term.
Right, which is
the
point I'm making, that there is probably, for anybody who's disillusioned with Donald Trump at the minute, and for people that still want us to get a relationship back with the United States, which I think we all do, eventually down the road, that what we're saying is, the point I'm trying to say is I think he might only have about, 8 months left to do everything that he wants to do.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it, that if he doesn't get it done now, come the midterms, and any government suffers the same thing. But, Trump is an interesting figure. Also, the way people vote now, it's just dividing up in such weird ways. Half an hour ago, somebody's a Green Party member. The next moment, they're a Reform Party member. You think it's like the world has gone, in a very different direction from anything we've seen before. So Trump could be in that position where he's properly kneecapped at the midterms, which puts him in a fairly impotent position. He might not be controlling the houses in the way that he currently is, Congress and the like. May be a very different picture come the midterm. So, yeah, that's why he's doing it all now, Tony.
Right, the last point I want to make, and I'm going to get off, and I thank you for your time in. So, basically, there is a little bit of hope left for us all. I've just make a prediction that I think J.D. Vance is actually sticking his nose in the background of it, because I think he's pushing for position to be the next potential leader of the Republican Party, because he's not come forward much recently, and which I think is quite significant.
Well, he is. I mean, he will be. I mean, the convention in the States is usually that the vice president becomes the candidate, right, for the next, after 2 terms, and Trump can't serve another term. So he's likely to be the candidate for the Republicans, and, I think many Republicans will see him as the real version of what they wanted Trump to be.
Right, thank you for your time, Ian.
It's a pleasure, Tony. You take care. We've got another... Is this the 4th Tony we've got coming on today? We've got Tony, who's in Edinburgh. Hello, Tony.
Hi, how are you doing, Ian?
Very good. I think you're the 4th Tony on the show today.
No.
We had 2 Tonys back-to-back in the first hour, and now we've got another 2 Tonys. Is it International Tony Day? I don't know.
Well, I think we've all got the day off.
Maybe. It must be that. It must be that. What are you making of it all, Tony?
Well, Miliband is an absolute lunatic. I've worked in power station control rooms for decades and offshore production platforms for decades. He hasn't got a clue of any subject he talks about, but especially net zero. Yeah,
that does seem to be the case, doesn't it? But he's very outspoken about it.
Well, he is, but I don't know where he's getting his information from.
Yeah, well, he's getting it from the school, the philosophy of Ed Miliband, I think.
Yeah, he is. We've got decades worth of oil and gas offshore, and I could break it down. We've got oil fields and gas fields. Oil or hydrocarbons, as it should be called, but because oil is a constituent, it's made up of dozens of constituents, which when you heat up, they release certain properties, which then form tarmac, heavy fuel oil for ships, etc., petrol, diesel, and then you get the light ends, which are then what you would call gas. They also come off what you would call oil.
Sure.
And then that then goes to power stations, which power stations, we don't have any oil-fired power stations anymore. We use gas, which is used to power essentially like aeroplane engines, and they heat up water, which makes steam, which generate electricity.
Yeah.
And then the other gas, then, when you heat it up, that releases constituent parts, which is propane, butane, ethane, all those sort of constituent parts, which we are then using to make everything that you would look around the studio that's plastic-based. And there is no alternative to any of that. None whatsoever. We've got one cracking plant in the UK.
So just tell us, what is happening at the moment, Tony, in the North Sea? Is there nothing happening there?
Well, there is, but it's almost like, well, because for offshore companies, it's all based on the extraction cost per barrel.
Yeah.
And net zero, with the offshore tax up to 78%, means that they're sitting on billions of barrels of oil per day potential, is what it's called, BOPD. So we're sitting there, but at the minute what they're trying to do is extract the oil that they've got in the known reservoirs as quickly as they can before they shut down. But I know there is dozens of reservoirs that are sitting there that need the investment to get the oil and gas extracted. It's there. The technology exists to get it out, but they're not going to invest the money because they won't get the revenue back.
Yeah.
And that's the ones that we know about. So we've got known reservoirs that we are using now, and there are different, what they call free-flowing oil. So you open a valve and the oil comes to the surface. You've got other reservoirs where you put high-pressure water down and that flushes the hydrocarbon to the valve. When you open it, it comes to the surface and it goes into a production platform. And then you've got another version which is called gas lift, and that changes the density, which then means that the oil comes up to the surface into the production platform.
So we could be producing more?
Absolutely, we could be producing more. There's known reservoirs that are there, and they've got things called directional drilling, so we can actually link a lot of the smaller reservoirs together, which would then make it viable if there was a long-term future to do it.
How long would that take? If Ed Miliband said, I've seen the light, I've changed my mind, I was speaking like a nutter for the last 2 years, let's go crazy in the North Sea. Could that happen like that, or is there a process to get that back up and running?
No, that's years, because you've got to do what they call tieback. So you either build a new platform, which they won't do now, or you have like a floating platform, if you like, so you can essentially park it over the top,
sure.
FPSOs are called, and you can get it out that way. But all of these require millions, if not billions of pounds of investment to get it back over 20, 30 years.
Wow.
We know there's reservoirs to last. We've got probably 40, 50 years worth of revenue potential out there, and that's known fields or potential fields, or the seismic reports have been done, and they're just sitting waiting to go. There's also the cost of extraction cost is based on the depth of the water. So North Sea is quite shallow. West of Shetland, there's some really deep water. The extraction cost would be higher, but there is billions of oil, billions of gallons of oil in deep water, which costs more to get out. But the companies in Britain, because of this, over the last 15 years, basically since the Tories put it in net zero, and this Labour government, and in Scotland, the SNP, have basically crucified investment into this industry such that they're only existing now basically to the point where they kill the wells, i.e. they inject them with concrete just to shut the wells down, so they can never, once they do that, they kill the well, it can never be reopened.
So no one can ever go back, and they're doing that.
Yes, the oil companies are doing that now.
It's incredible that would be the case. Listen, Tony, you've been so informative on this, and brilliant work from you. Thank you, Tony, in Edinburgh, who's enlightened us on quite a lot of the insanity of what is going on. Yeah, you lob a load of concrete down those pipes, then no one's going back down there again. Just before we pause, Donald Trump has just posted on his Truth social network. I'll read this post to you. It's a little lengthy, but it does come from the president, and it's completely relevant to everything we've been talking about. He says this: the United States has been informed by most of our NATO allies they do not want to get involved with our military operation against the terrorist regime of Iran in the Middle East. This is despite the fact that almost every country strongly agreed with what we are doing, and that Iran cannot in any way, shape or form be allowed to have nuclear weapons. I am not surprised by their action, however, because I have always considered NATO, where we spend hundreds of billions of dollars per year protecting these same countries, to be a one-way street. We will protect them, but they will do nothing for us in particular. in a time of need. Fortunately, we have decimated Iran's military, their navy gone, their air force gone, their anti-aircraft and radar is gone, and perhaps most importantly, their leaders at virtually every level are gone, never to threaten us, our Middle East allies, or the world again. Because of the fact that we have had such military success, we no longer need or desire the NATO countries' assistance. We never did. Likewise, Japan, Australia, or South Korea. In fact, speaking as President of the United States of America, by far the most powerful country anywhere in the world, we do not need the help of anyone. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. And that's his focus. I would just pick up on one point when he talks about we're there for NATO and NATO not for us. He is part of NATO. He is NATO. America are NATO. It's not like a separate entity. So make of that whatever you will. But that's been very much a line he's dropped. We don't need anyone. We can do this on our own. Thoughts on that? That story is going to run for the next 24 hours or more, that's for sure. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. This from Paul in Fife, who says, why isn't someone like your caller Tony from Edinburgh not in charge of our energy strategy? Instead of Ed Miliband, it's a good point. Or, as Paul puts it, that total clown Ed Miliband. It's a serious question. Also, does Miliband ever have a conversation with people like Tony? Possibly not. Possibly not. Let's move to this story. There are roughly 50,000 to 60,000 active medicinal cannabis patients in the UK. But according to a new study, the drug could be doing more harm than good for people with mental health conditions. Let's speak with the neuropsychopharmacologist, Professor David Nutt. David, good afternoon to you.
Good to talk to you, Ian.
And nice to have you with us. So what's the deal here? I mean, this battle has gone on forever. I mean, you know famously about the battle of what people think of cannabis and its classification and its use and all the rest of it. So where are we now? We're hearing about there could be people who are suffering harm rather than good. What's your initial take on that statement?
Well, the first thing is that isn't a study. That was truly a bizarre article in the Times. The study itself looked at medical evidence for medical cannabis value in papers published between 1999 and 2005. And there wasn't a lot of medical cannabis being used then. And since then, we know 100 million Americans have got access to medical cannabis. And as you commented, now it's about 70,000 in the UK privately. And unfortunately, it's not really available on the NHS. Many other countries, we've got much larger proportion. And it's being used in a great many different disorders.
Sure.
It actually is a very powerful medicine. The only reason we're not using more of it is because it can't really be patented because it's a plant. If it could have been, then it would have been an established medicine. But because it's a plant, it's not that. We haven't got patents, so companies aren't selling it and promoting it. However, there is no question there are risks from using cannabis, particularly in people who have a propensity to being psychotic. And that is the major concern.
Yeah.
But there are also others who have a tendency to become addicted, and cannabis can be addictive as well. But the real problem is that in our attempts to stop anyone using any form of cannabis, we have completely distorted the market. We've taken what was called traditional herbal or resin cannabis, which was about 4 to 5% THC, and also contained a protective element called cannabidiol. That has basically been eliminated because we've stopped importing from countries like Lebanon or Morocco. Now we rely on homegrown. The homegrown is hydroponic, and it's also grown under ultraviolet light. So we get a much, much stronger plant, much more THC, the stoning agent, complete elimination of the protective agent, cannabidiol.
Wow.
So if anyone wants to use cannabis recreationally now, they are basically forced to use the worst kind of cannabis. It's a bit like if you said, we want to stop people drinking, so we're going to get rid of beer. Well, drinkers would then turn to wine, and then they would probably turn to spirits, because spirits basically got more bang for your buck. So we've created a problem with cannabis, and that's something we actually predicted. Government took no notice because they really thought they could eliminate drug use. They failed, and what they have done, though, is denied access to medical cannabis to millions of people. There's still 1 million people using it, black market cannabis, for health reasons in this country today, because they still can't get it on the NHS, even though it is a medicine.
Yeah. It's kind of fascinating, isn't it? Because as you rightly said in your answer there, David, I mean, this idea, politicians always believe they have this sort of unique ability to somehow get rid of drugs. Now, I mean, these guys, you've dealt with people in government, and, these guys aren't stupid. And, many of them in their student days would have had their dalliances as well. I mean, anyone with a brain knows that you can't legislate your way out of drug use.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I was keen to come on your program, because until recently, most of the media believed you could, or most of the media, particularly the newspapers, were pushing the governments to be tougher and tougher on drug users. And thankfully, now we're having a debate, which I think most people now say, actually, most sensible people realize they support you. You cannot legislate yourself out. You have to have much more subtle approaches. You have to regulated markets. You have to give access to people to safer versions. In the same way, I mean, why do we have any kind of licensing of alcohol? Because when we opened up in the 1700s, the ability to distill, we got a tsunami of gin into this country, and people were drinking gin in pint glasses because it was the same price as beer.
And that was just the kids.
Well, quite. So we wisened up there, and we realised actually you need a regulated market for alcohol, and you need to tax the stronger versions appropriately. And we should have done that with cannabis 30, 40 years ago, rather than try to eliminate it and create more of a problem as a result.
There have been Home Secretaries in the past who have talked about how they can, they will give the green light to medical use, but every time I've done a story on this and spoken to patients who, particularly ones with kids, epilepsy, those kind of conditions, who desperately need it, and they talk about it being absolutely game-changing, they've hit a brick wall every time they've tried to access this apparent medical use of cannabis.
It's outrageous. I think the denial of medical cannabis to children with epilepsy is the biggest medical scandal since the Bristol heart scandal. It's been going on for 20 years. 3 or 4 children a year die because their parents can't afford access. There are only 8 prescriptions on the NHS in the 7 years since cannabis was made a medicine. And that is because doctors don't want to believe, and that's because doctors haven't been taught about it. And many doctors work for drug companies that are making alternatives to medical cannabis. And the government doesn't want to essentially accept the parents. The parents are telling us, by spending thousands of pounds a month keeping their kids alive, that these drugs work. And we know that. We've done an audit. My charity, Drug Science, has done an audit of 21 children whose lives have been transformed by medical cannabis. Yeah. But only 3 of them get it on the NHS. The rest have to buy it privately. It is outrageous. And it is something that should be changed. Sorry.
I was just going to say, David, just to enlighten us, we're not talking about cannabis where, you know, your child gets stoned as a result of it. That component is removed. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, certainly in the beginning, for most children who are using cannabis for epilepsy, they're using what's called a full plant extract. So they're largely using a cannabidiol. They're also using other ingredients, multiple hundreds of different cannabinoids in the plant, and very low levels of THC. The kids are not getting stoned. That's a fact.
Is there any hope on the horizon for far more recognition to what the reasonable uses could be? Is there an ear anywhere in Westminster that is willing to take this more seriously? Wes Streeting was seen to be a slightly more open book when it came to understanding these things. Haven't heard much from him.
There are certainly, I know there are people in Parliament, more in the Lords than in the Commons, who are on medical cannabis. But they don't want to come out because they don't want to be vilified for being stoners. And that is the problem. We spent the last 50 years telling people how dangerous cannabis is. And it's very hard for people who've been making those claims to actually admit they were wrong. In fact, what they tend to do is double down, say, if only we just got tougher, we would actually eliminate the problem. And of course, another scandal which has come from prohibition is the fact we've got 50, 60 people a year in prisons dying of synthetic cannabinoid spice.
Yeah.
No one ever died of cannabis in prisons, but we wanted to stop prisoners using any drugs. Cannabis was their popular drug. We tested it. They stopped using it because they lost parole, and then they started using spice, which is killing them. So another example of how prohibition drives the use of really generally, almost always, history tells us, going back really to 1910 when we tried to ban opium smoking and people started injecting morphine and heroin. History tells us people want to take drugs. And if you ban a less harmful drug, people almost always move to a more harmful one.
And in terms of the genuine issues there are with some people, who have horrendous psychotic episodes and reactions and goodness knows what as a result of taking cannabis, and there are many of those documented cases, how would that be dealt with in a world that recognised that cannabis should be legal? How would you address those genuine and very serious concerns?
Well, they didn't exist when I was a junior doctor because cannabis wasn't strong enough to do that. So you've got to go back to where it was. You've got to allow people access in a regulated market through pharmacies like they do in places like Switzerland to have access to a cannabis that doesn't drive them mad. Most people who are using strong cannabis, they don't want to go mad. They don't want to be psychotic. That's all they can get. And what's worse is they get it from dealers that actually want them to be psychotic so that they can force them to keep coming back, but also in a way to offer them other drugs as well.
Sure.
So the black market in cannabis is a gateway to more harmful drugs like fentanyl and crack cocaine and heroin, but it's also a market which really denies any sensible health intervention.
So you are confident that there would be a way going forward where you could legalise it for medical use? It could be used in a way that is properly administered. All the safety checks are in place. If somebody wants to go in a coffee shop, as in the Netherlands, and buy themselves a spliff, they could do that. That's a separate thing. But you could have a sensible cannabis market in this country in the same way that we have an alcohol market.
Yeah, that's called Canada. Called California, called Oregon, called Washington State. I think 17 now American states have legalized cannabis. In fact, I think over 30 now have medical cannabis. I mean, whatever we think about what America's doing, the problems that America's doing aren't being driven by cannabis use.
Yeah, that's true.
They're driven by much more extreme kind of attitudes rather than a drug effect. Medical cannabis works where it's being used in countries like America, yes.
So would it be that, I mean, the Green Party are talking about making everything legal? I mean, they're going to legalise stuff that's not even been invented yet by the sounds of things. They're going, they're going full on. What do you make of that?
No, what they mean, and I think I haven't spoken to them, but I have offered to, but I believe what they mean is move from prohibition, which has failed, to some kind of control in other ways. And you can control it, as we've just discussed. You can control drugs through legal access to drugs which are less harmful than drugs like heroin or fentanyl. You can reduce the harms of very harmful drugs by putting people rapidly into therapy, into treatment. One of the biggest problems with prohibition is that people are terrified of seeking help because they're doing something illegal. Many deaths from drugs like heroin or fentanyl occur because the person or the friends of the person don't want to call the ambulances, because they call the ambulance, the police come and they get arrested. So getting rid of that, the vulnerability to being criminalized for having used a drug, that makes a huge difference.
Sure.
And the other thing we should be doing is we should be setting up safe injection rooms, overdose prevention centers, because that way, given that you're buying the stuff on the black market and you have no idea what you're buying, at least if you were taking it in a place where the antidotes and reversal agents were available and doctors were available to reverse you, taking it off the street reduces harm. And they've had a safe injection room in Sydney in Australia for like 40 years. The country hasn't fallen apart. It's still got a good cricket team, but it has many fewer deaths from drugs like heroin than we have.
On that point, David, let's speak again, because this is interesting, and I think we can have a much wider discussion on all of these tangents to this, but really appreciate your time. Thank you, Professor David Nutt, neuropsychopharmacologist, and, of course, famously came to, some of you will remember, back in 2009, he was fired by Alan Johnson, the then Home Secretary, after he spoke out against the government's reclassification of taking cannabis from a Class C drug to a Class B drug. He thought that was a lousy decision, and the government decided that he was therefore surplus to requirements. And people will always divide up on, when you start hearing about, well, you're going to have official rooms you can go and jack up in. Goodness me, that sounds a bit weird. Maybe it does. His point, from a clinician's point of view, is that actually it's the far more sensible approach given the alternative. Thoughts on that? Probably haven't got time to get many calls on that, but he's an interesting voice on this. Your response is welcome. 0344 499 1000.
conflict breaks out anywhere in the world, it has consequences here at home. Talk War is your definitive national security briefing. From the conflict in Ukraine to the tensions in Gaza and the latest escalation with Iran, this is where you'll find comprehensive comment and expert analysis with multiple updates throughout the day. The Talk War podcast from Talk, available on the Talk app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Darren in Cumbria, who says, referenced Professor David Nutt, our previous guest. Darren says, the war on drugs has failed. I'm not promoting making it legal, but you will never solve the problem. You take out one major player and another one is waiting in the wings to take over. There is too much money involved. As for cannabis, it has its uses. I personally know someone who has MS and none of the medications were working. Someone suggested trying cannabis and all his symptoms disappeared and he can function. The medication he's given from the doctor makes him bedridden. Legalised controlled drugs is a win-win for the government and a no-brainer. They get the tax from it and people know what they are getting. It's a bit like prohibition, which didn't work. People will always find a way. Just my thoughts anyway. Great show. Darren, that's brilliant. And you put it so succinctly and simply, because it is oddly quite a simple answer, but that no politician will put their name to it. I think back to Alan Johnson, the Home Secretary who sacked David Nutt, our previous guest, back in 2009. I don't believe for 1 second Alan Johnson would disagree with what Darren in Cumbria has said. But publicly, he had a very different view. Now, I could be mistaken. I don't know Alan Johnson. I've interviewed him before. I bumped into him in this building about a year and a half ago. Very nice guy. As a union man, former postman, bats mostly from the left. Everything points to the fact that Johnson would be pro what we just read out there, but his public position was very much the opposite. Let's get a final word from Richard down in London on Donald Trump. We've not got long, Richard, but I'm sure you can do it. Good afternoon.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. Donald Trump has given us obviously 2 days to make a decision in terms of sending ships down to the States. Yeah. And like a good old-fashioned school bully, we only had 48 hours to make that decision, and now obviously he says he doesn't need the help anymore. I mean, the reality is, this man was very clear and quite nasty, actually, in opposition when he talked about the limitations of Joe Biden. I'm afraid it's a bit the pot calling the kettle black. But Ian, I've got a proposal for you. You won't hear me saying this a lot because I'm a factualite, but I think we need a new tax. I'll tell you what for.
Go on.
Currently, we have a rather doubtful a nuclear deterrent.
Yeah.
We have Trident, but we buy Trident from the Americans.
Sure.
I propose that we obviously need to increase taxes to fund this, but it's really important. We need to develop our own independent nuclear weapon.
Interesting.
We do not need to be dependent upon the United States. And in the meantime, it's so serious, this, we may as well just do a deal with the French and say, look, because the French obviously, they've got their own nuclear deterrent.
Yeah, true. So we need a nuke. We essentially need a nuke tax in order to fund that. I get it. Listen, I've got to step in, Richard, because we have hit the clock. I didn't get a chance to read